Some years ago, I met the gentleman who owns this engine, and it turned out he lives in a castle. And of course he invited me around to have a look at it. You know, it isn't really a castle as most people know. It's really a big, beautiful country house that's built to look like a castle. It's got battlements and everything, but it's never really been under siege. Its owner is James Harvey Bathurst. We got friendly really because he's a dedicated traction engine enthusiast and railway enthusiast.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me.
I helped him restore one of his favourite engines, Atlas, which of course once resided in the north of England around Manchester, but now it lives here on the forecourt of Eastnor Castle. Here we are in the Great Hall at Eastnor Castle, but to me it looks a lot more comfy than a proper castle. You know, castles are cold, drafty places, and this is quite lovely and comfortable. And James here is going to tell us, you know, the reason why, in a way. Isn't that right, James?
Yeah, well, it's a bit surprising, isn't it? Because it does look like a castle from the distance, and that was the point. In 1800, a lot of people were looking back to the medieval times, and my family had been here for about 200 years, and they thought this is the time to show everybody that we're a really old family and put up a really impressive buildings and revival castles. This is a Norman revival castle, seemed to be a bit the fashion. So. That's what they did. And this room was the last of the rooms as you came in that would really look in those days as if it was
like
the medieval effect.
Chamber,
So it used to be full of armour, and then we've redecorated it now with pictures. This is what it would have been. You see, it would have had an empty room, a few shields about the place, and then every now and again the lord of the house would invite people in and fill this area with trestle tables and chairs.
Yeah, a bit like a big banquet in hall style.
Yeah, exactly. And have a banquet and then you know, it would be cleared again. So you come in, you'd be really impressed, like going to the middle of a cathedral. And then the rooms beyond, actually quite small and comfortable by comparison.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the sheer size of this room to impress people.
It's incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
And it's, but now we've got it furnished. I think in the Edwardian era, they used to have it as what they call an Edwardian living hall.
Favourite period.
So there we are.
That real marble up there, you know,
that is real marble.
Yeah.
It was redecorated in 1860. That sort of period by a man called Mr. Fox, and they decided they wanted to have an Italianate room. So the medieval trappings disappeared, all this marble came in, and they've probably sent too much, because in the cellars we've got a few spare columns. So in case as one drops off, we can always go
put another one back. Very thoughtful of them.
In those niches, the plan was to put statues, but apparently I think they ran out of money a few times redecorating this house. So the statues were never put there. But my mother always said they'd be very difficult to dust. And I think I wouldn't have minded. I'm not so fussy about dust up there. In fact, we were quite lucky altogether with this house, because after the war it was very difficult, with as it was for everybody. And a lot of houses that time were demolished. But my mother claims that she got an estimate for demolition here, but it was so expensive, she thought it was better to carry on and live quietly and save the money. So I'm very glad she did.
Yeah, or you might not be here today.
Yeah.
I know I have a book at home about the terrible carnage in English country houses in 50s and 60s. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Some, you know, they could bring themselves to even start knocking a one down. Is beyond me.
Couldn't now.
No,
wouldn't want to. Shouldn't need to either.
Well, the age of legalised vandalism is nearly over. In the summer, when James has one of his steam days, his hospitality is very nice. He puts me up in this beautiful bedroom with all this lovely walnut bedroom suite. Quite fantastic. I mean, it's a lovely room with beautiful oak quarter-sawn shutters, you know, really nice, lovely fit in every detail. The castle's full of wonderful staircases in all the turrets and towers, you know. Not all of them as grand as this one, you know. It must be very lonely living in a castle. I know on the occasions I've stayed here, when it goes dark round here, it goes dark, you know. It's a bit like being down a coal mine. So this pretend castle was never really put to the test in war. Real castles had a much more serious purpose. The reason they were built was to keep attacking armies out. So how did something as functional as a castle turn into something as ornate as this? Man's most basic need was to defend himself, and our earliest defensive constructions were great earthworks like the outer banks and ditches that surround old Sarum in Wiltshire. This huge earthworks were built like in the Iron Age, 500 years BC. It sort of defies all wonder when you think that they had no machinery or anything, it were built by the basic tools and muscle power. I mean, when you think to actually get up there where the defenders were, you'd got to come up this banking over here with whatever you were going to throw at them, which wouldn't be a lot because you'd be knackered by the time you got up here. Then you've got to descend into the valley with the wrath of them men up there throwing great rocks at you maybe, and then of course attempt to get up. It must have been a pretty, impossible place to take. And when you think all that time ago, long time ago, like the forerunner of a castle. But it was all pretty basic. If you want to see real engineering skills on a truly grand scale, you have to wait for the Romans. When the Romans came to Britain, they brought with them a far more sophisticated building techniques than what we'd ever had before, Hadrian's Wall here is the biggest monument that the Roman Empire left behind for us. It stretches right across northern England from Beaumaris on the Solway Firth to Wall's End on Tyne. And for 300 years it was the Roman Empire's northwest frontier. Its purpose was to stop the marauding Scotsmen getting across the border. Or as Hadrian put it, to stop the barbarians getting towards the Romans. And work started in the year of 122 AD, and it took 6 years to build, I mean, they worked bloody hard, it's an amazing piece of work, You can't help but notice as you wander along it the different techniques that's been used, Some parts it follows the contours of the hillside, other parts it's dead level, as though some men had some form of spirit levels or some form of levelling equipment, only a stick with a T-piece on and a plumb bob, and the other guys just follow the mountain, sort of style. By 400 AD, the Roman Empire had declined and the Romans had gone back to Rome, and the wall became derelict. And people started to nick bits of it and take it away for building abbeys and dry stone walls and churches. And this went right on till the 19th century, by which time 2/3 of it had gone, the top 10 foot had been nicked. And by this time people realised that it was such an important monument that, it should be preserved, and really that's what you can see what's left of it today. All along it, all the way, there's quite many forts, I just don't know how many, but at regular intervals there's little watchtowers and turrets and like strong points where no doubt they had sentries with a watch out for looking for these marauding Scotchmen. This is rather a splendid pillow that I think once upon a time must have supported 2 arches in what's left of the northern gateway. I mean, the beautiful chisel marks still here, it's amazing after all these years, all these centuries, These 2 towers, one on each side, the far one were once the guard room, I've heard tell. I mean, and judging by the thickness of the walls, it must have been maybe 30 or 40 feet high, quite a nice bit of building, no wonder really the things lasted so long, And really I think, but for the vandalism, there'd have been a lot more of it here. This gateway over the back here, the stone ramp that were once here has been removed to expose, I think in 1852 or something, they decided they'd have a dig and find out just exactly what we're holding all this lovely towers and masonry up. And if you go around the other side, you can see some wonderful great blocks, much bigger than the rest of the walls made out of, which of course constituted the foundation for the gateway and the 2 watchtowers and the arches and everything. It's rather a grand bit of building, I think. But for people stealing it, there'd have been, judging by the quality of the bottom of it all, there would have been a lot more of it left. like the stonework there, you know, the foundations for this entrance, it's really as remarkable and as good as any Victorian engine bed, you know, the quality of it and all. Very impressive, you know. It's when you think all them centuries have elapsed since it was actually done. This is rather an interesting building. It's the granary, and it must have been quite a tall building, and it's been messed about with a bit. These two centre walls originally weren't here. There were a row of pillars down the middle, and I think that's the reason for the buttresses on the outside to take, I mean, it'd be a first span for that sort of period, to take the thrust of the timber in the roof, hence the buttresses, you know. All these upright pillars once had a wooden floor on, so the air could circulate underneath the grain and the food and whatever were in here and keep it nice and fresh, you see. I think I'll go and have a look at the ventilation system. Interesting really, in so much that the whole building slopes downhill, you know. I mean, there's no mining subsidence around here. So I wonder if it were always like that, you know. I mean, these are the pillars that supported the joists, which from the looks of the holes in here must have been about 6 inches square, with then on top of them, of course, the floorboards. And these are the holes that the wind howl through to keep everything nice and fresh and stop the food going rotten, you know. And a good size for shoving a dog through to catch the rats, I suppose. All very interesting stuff. This behind me is head office, where the commander, of course, doled out all his orders and all the records were kept. And it's very obvious, you can tell it was quite posh compared with the rest of the place, with the amount of pillars that are lying about, you know. And the quality of the stonework is much improved on, you know, sort of, you know, like the latrines and the bathhouse and the granary, you know, it's much better quality. Just what it looked like when it were originally built, I don't know, but here again, if you read the pamphlets, there's been a lot of messing about, you know. Originally, it were open at the front with a colonnade of pillars, and then they built a wall in front of that, which I don't know what happened to the pillars, but the stumps of them are still there. Some of these stones are quite ornate, you know. This looks as though it's been some sort of keystone. But I mean, the reeding and the beading around the edges, when you think it's had 1400 years of erosion, it's, you know, it's done very well. And I mean, at this end, and there's some quite ornate moulding being worked on it. Really, it must have been quite interesting to see it, you know, when it actually stood in the form of a building. But alas, here it is in a jigsaw puzzle. You know, this behind me is the largest collection of buildings in the whole fort. It's the commandant's house and all. He's got his own private courtyard and a wonderful central heating system, whereby the products of combustion went underneath the floor. The floor is supported on stone pillars and flags on top, and then the gases come up flues in the walls. He must have been nice and snug in winter, you know. I mean, when you look at the remains of the underfloor pillars, you can actually see the erosion where the gases from the fire would, you know, attack it most in the centre of the pillar, and they've all gone capstan shaped. Of all the forts along Hadrian's wall, Housteads is one of the best preserved. There's examples of nearly everything here, you know. There's the governor's house, the granary, the latrines, or the toilets, and all the lot were constructed by 3 legions of Roman soldiers, which amongst them they had architects, builders and joiners, and that warranted, you know, such a great engineering feat as this, you know, at that time in our history. You know, it's a magic piece of work, really. Like, this is the remains of one-way gateway into this fort, and it's very interesting because you can, you know, it's been evidently used a lot more than the other one, and you can see where the gudgeons have been for the gates, and of course the lump in the middle's like a biggest doorstop you've ever seen. And then the grooves where the wagon wheels have gone through, and it's all there and quite in evidence. It's interesting to note all over this fort how there's no metal left anywhere, you know, as though even after the Romans departed, the bits of metal that they left, you know, which they must have left some other people have come and pinched it all, you know, evidently easier to make things out of it than dig their own iron ore and start again. Yeah, this really is one of the highlights of the whole fort, you know, the communal bathtub and the communal toilets or latrines, and it's got a rather ingenious watercourse system that sort of starts off with the overflow from the bathtub. That's this thing I'm stood in, and it wanders its way around first of all down a channel where they didn't have toilet paper then, they had sponges, and they washed the sponges in the water that overflowed from the bathtub, and that goes round a complicated system, you know. I'll do a bit more on the bathtub because it's rather ingenious how they kept the water in it, you know. There's beautiful grooves chiselled down the ends of each stone, and then they poured molten lead down, and then of course they'll have corked it up rather like they used to cork the wooden planks in the deck of a ship, which of course would keep the water in, you know. But the water, when it ran out of this overflow here, down that little trough, and then down that one, and down that one, and a little waterfall, and it went into a big trough that went all the way around the centrepiece, where when you were sat chatting with your mate on the old thunderbox, you reached over with your sponge and washed it in the groove, which of course is round here. The groove, this is the groove here that it sort of ran, the overflow water ran and dripped into here and ran round here. It went all the way down there, round the end and back along here, and then into the main flow of water that God knows where that come from, but it took all the affluent away, downhill down there, round the corner and back down and down that tunnel there that mysteriously disappears underneath the fields, where I suppose it all ran out down the hill where the sheep are, and it must have been a bit stinky down there in them days, you know. But it's amazing how it's all survived, and like of course after they'd washed the sponges, they were quite an hygienic lot. I rather think that these two sinks, the rectangular shaped one and the round one, would be where they washed their hands afterwards, you know. Just what they did with the sponges, I don't know, because all the woodwork and the actual planking, I suppose, with the holes in, is all of course gone, you know. But at least the stonework's remained, and you can see how the main channel has a steady fall all the way around until it disappears out underneath the fields down there. What's interesting is the way they kept the water in the bath. Yeah. Right, that's it. It's Ousted Fort, the Roman baths, the way they had of keeping the water in them, you know, as the stone flags came end to end, they actually cut a groove down the middle and of course poured molten lead in like I've just done here. This is only like a small representation of what the Romans did, but it was a heck of a good way of keeping it watertight, because this, like I said, is on a small scale. They would have had possibly to build a little pile of stones up at each side with some clay behind to stop the molten lead shoving the clay out, you see. Here I'm a bit lucky because I've got this old moulding box and some sand on each side, which will have the same effect. But when the box is dismantled, you'll see like the lead all the way down each side of the two flags that constitute the side of the bathtub, and then they'd have a corking tool similar to the one you would have for corking the deck of a ship up, and just bash the lead in between the stones. And of course it evidently was quite a success, you know, because still there to this day even, you know. It's quite amazing. If it had been made of iron, it would have rusted away a long time ago. I'll now proceed to dismantle the moulding boxes and shift the sand, and we'll be able to see just how where the lead is all the way down in the joint. You see, right? Now, if you imagine that, you know, these things were 3 feet deep, all as you would have to do is bash that with an hammer each side, and the lead would swell up in the joints in between the stonework, and of course make it watertight. And also the hole in the middle, or the diamond-shaped slot in the middle, would sort of stop the flagstones moving in either direction. Right? A clever way of doing things. I'll now take the bottom one off, and we can then sort of pull it apart and see, you know, exactly where the lead's actually gone to. Blooming heck, it's stuck. Believe it or not. Blooming, I didn't expect that. I didn't actually expect it to be stuck together as well as what it is. That's amazing. Look, isn't that good? I'm quite pleased with that. It's actually stuck it together. I didn't think that it would have done that. I thought it would have come apart. You know, I mean, really, if it were corked up, then it'd definitely be watertight. I think I'll go and build a Roman bath somewhere now. You know, quite good, that. Quite pleased. I didn't expect it, honestly, to be stuck together so well. Yeah. Yeah, Emperor Hadrian will be proud of us. Hadrian's Wall only saw active service for about 300 years, you know. Dover Castle here, one of Europe's strongest fortresses, saw action from the Iron Age up till the Atomic Age almost. And here's Ken, who's the general manager, who's going to tell me why it's such a strategic and important spot, you know. I mean, I know for one thing we're high up. That's a good start.
The reason why it's so important is out there. If you look closely, you can just see France.
Yeah, yeah.
You can see France, they can see us. And if they can see us, they want to invade. And this place is really here to protect this country from invasion. If you take Dover Castle, you've got somewhere to sort of to keep your reinforcements happy. They come in, and it's called the Key of England. Mm-hmm. It probably starts with an Iron Age fort, goes on to a Roman lighthouse, Saxon church, Norman keep, World War I, World War II, and then a nuclear shelter for World War III.
So there's been a bit of everything, really.
There's a bit of everything.
We'll have a trip round, of course, and look at the Roman lighthouse and all the other bits.
Okay, let's
and
go and have a look.
These interesting tunnels. I've always been a.
I know the tunnels are the key to the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. Did they have guns in them and things like that?
Well, they were built for guns because they were sloping tunnels, and they're sloping so that when the guns, the 32-pounders, went off, the recoil took them back again, and they trundled back again.
Oh,
so
brilliant.
you can get in there without the steps, so you can roll the gunpowder down. But we think they were probably used for barracks because they've got fireplaces in and everything else. Must have been cold down there.
Fireplaces. And like chimneys and all that coming out.
Well, a long sloping tunnel with a chimney at the end and a spiral staircase at the end so they can get up and down them. So built really in Napoleonic times, again, to sort of to guard, to get this channel against attack.
Just in case Mr. Bonaparte sets out.
Well, everybody landed here. I mean, this is a natural harbour anyway. You can see the cliffs are quite steep all the way around. There aren't that many natural harbours. The Romans landed here, so everybody else landed here. So, I mean, the Romans built their own lighthouse on this hill, on the other hill to get them in. The Romans landed here. St. Augustine landed just around the corner from here. So everything starts from Dover, all the Roman roads and everything else. It covers the whole period of the history. This, in fact, was one of the lookout points for World War I and World War II anyway. But let's go and have a look at the Roman lighthouse and the fortress.
Come on. Right, come on. Hey. We're here on top of the mountain.
We get a better view from here. I mean, you get a view of sort of the different periods. Right, there's the Iron Age fort, which was probably one of the original things that it was there. But you had a Roman lighthouse, one or two Roman lighthouses to guide the people into the port of Dover. Then you've got a Saxon church. Then eventually you've got the Norman keep.
Yeah.
And originally there would have been in 1066 there was a wooden fort here, but I mean a few hundred years later on you then got the big stone structure there, built in 1180 for Henry II.
And all the wooden ones nearly always got burned down.
This is the Roman Pharos or lighthouse, tallest Roman structure in Europe. And the Romans were really developing the port. I mean, there was one of these lighthouses here. There was one on the other hill, sort of opposite over there. Yeah. There's one in Boulogne, and the idea was to get you into to get you safely into there.
Yeah.
Originally, it would have been, we think, 8 sort of octagonal sort of sections going up, but there's only 4 remaining, and it was altered again in the 14th century. But I mean, you can see the wind erosion, and you can see the
Roman tiles, aren't they? Every 3 or 4 foot.
Well, you can see the same tiles over there in the church. So they were quite happy when they were building their church. They picked some of the tiles, nicked the things there. But there would have been a brazier on the top, and obviously somebody up there to light it. And it was about 80 feet high when it was originally built.
Yeah, actually, on the picture of it I've seen, the offsets are much more well represented in the bit that nobody's tried to repair than they are here, aren't they?
Well, I mean, the wind comes from there. It's a very abrasive wind. You can see all the erosion there.
Somebody's like rebuilt that bit, haven't they?
It was rebuilt in the 15th century. I think part of it was used as a bell tower. But I mean, everywhere in the castle is being used for something else.
Yeah, them are interesting, aren't they? Them square holes, as though there might have been a balcony or some sort around it.
Well, either that, or they would have had a platform in, because they've got to stand it on something else. So probably the things came out of that. The beams came out of that as a means of support.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting bits about it, isn't there? These arches along the bottom are unusual.
Probably for the updraft.
Yeah.
But it's certainly windy here anyway. Yeah. But it's been altered over the centuries. It's just everything here, and the whole of the castle gets altered as
somebody's
you need.
coat of arms up there, isn't there? There's
something in there.
Long eroded away.
That's probably back to the 14th century as opposed to Roman.
The keep was built by Henry II in the 12th century, and with a few modifications, it retained a military role right up to 1945.
So here we are at Henry II's Great Keep, built in 1180 and actually designed and built by Morris the engineer, who built lots of other famous castles around the country. But you can see how magnificent it is.
Yeah, it is a smart job, isn't it? It's a lot squarer than most we've had a look at.
There were 2 buildings. Sort of, you go up those steps and along, and then you cross into a drawbridge and go into the inner part of it. But it's been used for lots of different things over the years.
You can see nearly every window opening's been altered, hasn't it?
It's been changed. I mean, we used it one period to house French prisoners of war. So when they were in there, they carved all the names and bits and pieces on all of the walls.
We've seen a bit of that,
Well, we'll see a bit of that later on. It was also used by most of the monarchs as they were going over to France. They go over to France. They want somewhere. This is their hotel. This is their hotel before they go over there. And the exhibition that we've got inside is putting it back as to tell you the story of how it was, what they had to do to get it ready for when the king was coming.
Yeah, panic stations.
Panic stations is right.
Yeah, it is quite a lot more sophisticated, the stonework, isn't it, than a lot of the Norman things we've had a look at.
Well, this is a royal fortress. All the kings when they were coming over here, Henry II onwards, they used this as a palace, a sort of a guest house, if you like, before they went over to France. So the bedrooms have got their own ensuite sort of garderobes. Now this is new. This is novel. He's got his own chapel. There's a floor for him. There's a floor for other people. It all changes. Over there was 12th century, and there would have been a covered walkway going from there into the keep. These are all Georgian barrack blocks. So you've got the barrack blocks for the sergeants. Then you've got the curved ones for the officers.
Very posh. Circular headed windows.
Yeah. So it's just different. Again, just different periods. But they just alter. They altered whatever was there just to meet the needs of whatever they wanted to do. The needs of the time.
No, them steps go to.
Well, there's a good one of the battlements and go all the way around. But you see, we've tried to put some of the lights back in there to give you an idea what they were there. And this is building number 9 because you see all the things there. But this is mainly a shell. We've started to restore the one over there, and we put something a little bit back to the 12th century a bit. But it's just
Yeah, the pity about the erosion, isn't it, on window arches, you know.
Well, the road's there, but if you see in between all the brickwork, you see all the flint. It's called napping, galleting, all the nap flint within the brickwork. That's
tough stuff.
That really is tough stuff. That stops you from from knocking it down and helps erosion.
Yeah, they don't seem to have used much of that on this part, have they?
It's not too bad considering. Like. The wind is very strong here. You can see some of the wind erosion. Some of the stones are very soft.
Of all the Norman castles and keeps we've been to, really, this one to me looks the most beautiful and best. It, sort of all the stones been dressed properly. Most of the others are like the rough stuff, random rubble that we've seen. But there's not a lot of that in here, is there? It's really splendid stonework in a way.
He spent a lot of money building this Henry II. It was designed by Morris the engineer. The lighter stone is Caernarfon, and he brought that over from France. But he spent the equivalent of 1 year's income building this.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. The floors the walls are 21 feet thick.
Yeah.
It's got its own chapel. It's got its own ensuite, sort of. Bedrooms for him. He's got ensuite bedrooms for his queen a bit further down. There's another chapel for the queen further down. So it's a real palace.
Yeah, I wonder if they built it like overhand, from starting off and leading over with everything. Because in them days it'd be a heck of a job finding enough wood for.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the scaffolding. In those days, certainly. We had it scaffolded a couple of years ago, and it took a lot of doing then.
Yeah.
Henry made Dover into one of the most powerful of all medieval castles. Its great strength was due to the successive rings of defensive walls protecting the keep in the centre.
Yeah, it's a pretty impregnable place, isn't it? There's like 3 or 4 layers of what you've got to get through. To get inside here where the king goes.
Well, this is the last line of defence. You have to sort of get into the keep itself, and to get out of here, you've got to go across a drawbridge to get to the inner bailey.
Yeah.
You then got the next wall, which is the inner bailey wall going around. Then you've got the outer bailey, and you can see the ditches. The ditches on both sides go all the way down to the cliffs, and the cliffs are sort of fairly impregnable anyway.
You've got 300 foot of sheer drop.
Well, there's 300 feet of cliff. We're at the highest point now, so there's 300 feet of cliffs, and we're about 90 feet high anyway. So this is the tallest point. Get a good view. You can see France very well now.
Yeah, you can see sunshine.
You see the white cliffs of France.
Whatever. Now the famous tunnel goes all the way under there.
All the way under there.
No, I don't think they'd have ever dreamt, the men who built this, that once we'd tunnel all that way.
Well, we'll look at the other side, because the most vulnerable part was the other side on this side. So we look at this side, and you can see where they actually broke into the castle, and we've had to tunnel underneath them to protect it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Let's go and have a look. This is the main entrance to the castle. The cliffs were sort of fairly impregnable, and the entrance was down here, and this is the most vulnerable, and this is where they did get in 1216. Prince Louis in France was attacking, and he put all his siege machines at this side, and the gateway was down there. What he did was, and you may be able to help on this, what he did was he then sort of tunneled underneath, set fire to the pit props. I think
down fell the tower.
Down fell the tower, and the gateway collapsed, and they got in.
That were it. Done for. Yeah.
Some of the towers are still there. You can still see some of the towers there.
This one and that one are still here on the drawing, but of course the main gate's completely ruined, isn't it, with the activity of the mining men.
What we can look at later on is the medieval tunnels, the tunnels that go out, so you can actually attack them coming in.
Yeah.
But and they've been sort of altered over the years as well. But you still get the feel of it. This was the entrance.
All that lot down there, of course, is all pretty new, isn't it?
Well, it's all been altered. They've altered it as well, and they've also put new gun ports on there. You see where they put the bigger guns on there now. But the picture that we have here shows what it was like at the time, and you see the different towers. And the towers were there so you could fire down at them. But there was a road coming in.
That thing there looks like a sort of a siege tower, doesn't it?
It's probably a siege tower, They would have brought their siege tower. The trebuchet, the big sort of catapult that we've got, we had built, that was only one of 2, and they brought that over from France, and they brought them over specifically to attack and throw things over and hit the castle and bring things inside the castle walls.
Very interesting that. They did the same at Rochester, didn't they? They undermined that castle. Somebody did. I should imagine if you were on guard up here, with your bow and arrow, and watching the great impregnable gate collapse in front of you, you get a bit worried, like.
Once that gate had fallen, and later on, they actually built a new gate, which is Constable's Gate, which is the one that we can see down there.
Yeah, and it never got rebuilt, did it?
No, it never got rebuilt.
They just made a nice fancy wall there instead.
The constable of the castle at the time was Hubert de Burgh.
Yeah.
Now, Chris de Burgh, the singer, is a descendant of him.
Is he? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that.
This is the tallest point. Get a good view. You can see France very well now.
Yeah. And it was from across that narrow strip of water that the greatest threats always came. So Dover Castle was always heavily fortified, and barrack blocks were built all over the place.
A lot of the buildings haven't survived, but this one here is the Regimental Institute. The whole area, the castle was turned into a huge barracks. There were the threat of Napoleon, and so they wanted lots of troops in the area. So this was the barrack. This was the Regimental Institute and the NAFI. In fact, we're going to put it back as a restaurant anyway. The other one over the other side, well, that was a barracks as well. Yeah.
Nice square cast iron downspouts, eh?
Well, I mean, they knew how to build things then. I mean, we've tried to preserve it as best we can. You know, there's a lot of wear. I mean, some of the
erosion,
stone mullions are going. But it's in good condition. It's in good condition.
No, it's a nice bit of building.
Well, it's lasted, and I mean, one thing that we do as English Heritage, we do try and sort of conserve as we find it. So hopefully it'll always be here like this.
At the end of the 18th century, when Britain was at war with France, conditions in the castle became very overcrowded. So the Royal Engineers brought in a company of miners to tunnel into the cliffs and create an underground barracks that accommodated over 2,000 men.
This is where they brought the gunpowder in and the guns down here, so they went down the slope.
Yeah.
We're all in a brickwork. Yeah, we've lime washed the brickwork, but otherwise it would be very, very dark.
Plenty of graffiti. Yeah. Been there a good while, hasn't it?
It'll be a good while. This one here is it's an R.L. Lloyd, 2nd Brigade, 2nd Royal Artillery, 18th of June.
1863.
1863. So it was the army guys that did it. You're in the army, you dig.
Yeah. How many miles of this is there?
About 3.5 miles.
3.5 miles.
And just before the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, they were turned into a bomb-proof command headquarters.
Yeah, it's very interesting down here.
This is the command centre for the coastal artillery. So, I mean, each of the tunnels had its own use by the different people. The one over the next to us was the Navy, and Admiral Ramsay had his bit of it in there. Corps Command Coastal Artillery in here, and they weren't allowed to meet. You know, the people who worked in here could only come in here and go out of the tunnel and back up again. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. It was all secret. But all the guns and all the radar were all controlled from here.
Yeah. For firing across the channel.
Firing across the channel, all of the guns.
And all that sort of thing. Yeah. It's all right, quite reminiscent of Dad's army, isn't it? You know, saw the sign up there, you know, don't help the enemy and all.
I mean, Dover was a very secret place during the war. I mean, it was a classified place during the war. I mean, after this was stopped being used, they built another level of tunnels further down. I mean, they soon ran out of use, so they soon ran out of space in the older tunnels. So they went down below and built themselves a 50-room regional war room. And at the end of the war, that obviously stopped being used. And they then decided they were going to use that and turn it into a regional seat of government, to look after the Cuban Missile Crisis. But
and it all faded away.
Well, it was classified until 86. I mean, you weren't allowed to know about it. I think everybody did. You weren't allowed to know about it. But in 86, I came in 86, and they said, well, you know, there's the keys to above the castle, and there's the keys to below the castle, and this was like a little time capsule. They'd done some of the bits and pieces, but this end was left as World War II. There were still World War II newspapers on the floor, and it was just like stepping back in time. Eerie, really scary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Scary.
Yeah. Is this like the original paint on the wall?
Yeah, the artifacts are original. As you say, it's the original paint on the walls, and we've put back some of the I think we made the weather up.
Well, Thought it looked pretty good,
They look
you know,
pretty
for
good,
like
but,
5 hours changes, they can't even do that now, can they?
But this is where the ladies in the
I've seen them
move
in
around all the bits
in
and
war
pieces.
films with these ancient speaking things and all. Yeah.
But there are bigger versions. There's a great big room downstairs where there was this big sunken table, and like you see on the films, where the people were around there. And again, with the
big
gun
steps.
commander's desk at the top and somebody overlooking them. But they built that into a pit, into a room. Here they've just used one of the small tunnels as best they can.
Yeah, but how long of a shift would they do down here without seeing daylight sort of style?
I don't think they would have worked that long. They had, some of them had dormitories on the site. Some of them had dormitories here, because this was manned 24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah.
They reckon there was about 200 people at any one time working in the clunnels. So, you know, I mean, but they used the spiral staircase to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were, but they didn't. You know, but this was a safe place underground.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine it feeling nice and secure underneath all this rock. About how far down from the surface of the
We are
cliff
now
are we?
100 feet down. And there's another level of tunnels
Yeah, below.
50 feet below us, and there's another level of tunnels 50 feet above us. But there's some more tunnels on the ground level.
Oh,
There are tunnels everywhere. It's chalk. It's
yeah,
so easy to
yeah,
tunnel.
easy. Yeah.
And they've used tunnels throughout all the different periods of history to help protect.
defend this coastline. Yeah. Yeah, I've just seen a map over there with Ramsgate, I think, or somewhere.
Oh, they've got huge tunnels. I mean, there are
I didn't know
tunnels.
they even that many.
Oh, no, I mean, a lot of the tunnels were used as World War II air raid shelters, and we've got loads of tunnels here that are air raid shelters. We think the original tunnels were probably used, because it was chalk, to dig the chalk out and use it as cement.
Yeah,
But it's so easy to dig out, and it's all dug out by hand. It's all, you know, so...
Yeah, you can see the pick marks, can't you? Really plain, and
You join the
see
army
the
to dig.
notches where they've had timbering to finish the crown of the ceiling off. Yeah.
And then they've strengthened some of the tunnels with the brickwork, and things. And we'll see some more of them later on.
I believe the gentleman who planned out, mapped out Dunkirk from somewhere in these tunnels in his little hideaway.
The next long tunnel along
Yeah.
on the other side of the wall here is the Navy's tunnel. And at the end of that tunnel, that's where Vice Admiral Ramsay, he was initially looking after the Dover Patrol. He was looking after the channel and sort of controlling all the ships going through there. He was the one that masterminded the evacuation of Dunkirk. It's coming up next year to its 60th anniversary with the little ships and how the British Expeditionary Forces, I think there was
there were all sorts of ships, weren't there?
338,000 sort of troops that were actually rescued.
Yeah. Oh, little ships of every shape, size and form.
But Churchill came down here. I mean, he came down here to talk with Ramsay about doing that. And we've got pictures of Churchill looking on the balcony, standing on the balcony, looking out. The King came down here. You could come here, because you could see France, you could stand there and you could actually see the war over in France. You could hear the guns, you could see the flashes, and people, it was a safe way of doing it, but I mean, it helped with the morale. We're in the Napoleonic tunnels, you can tell by the brickwork here. I mean, this was the original reason that they were put there, the Napoleonic tunnels, to stop the invasion, to help against the invasion, and just later used in World War I and then World War II.
Yeah, they must have had like great periods of idleness where nothing much happened there.
This is the Napoleonic staircase. It's a double helix.
Yeah, that means like it's two staircases.
Two cases, sort of one on top of the other.
Yeah.
And there's a triple one on the other side of the hill for Western Heights.
Yeah.
But this is what they used. They used it obviously sort of in the Napoleonic times, but they used it in World War II to get very quick access down into the hospital, from the hospital to the operations room.
Yeah, this ironwork's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's a different period. This is we've gone from Napoleonic now, but we're back into sort of World War II. So this is all 1940s, and it's a typical
gold mining style, isn't it?
I mean, the miners are probably the ones that dug it out in the first place.
Semicircular arches and corrugated iron.
But this is the underground hospital, the field dressing station, and it was built in 1942, really to take the pressure off all the various hospitals in the town, and just lots of wards for all the different sort of parts of the army and the navy and the air force. So let's have a look at one of the wards here.
Yeah. How many injured can you get in here, sort of style?
Well, it's probably depending on sort of what's wrong with them, I suppose. There's probably about 10 beds in here, and there's about sort of 10 to 12 sort of wards, depending. I mean, they just use the rooms for different things, but you can see the original. This is virtually as it was.
Quite posh, a fine example of a 1942 plywood barrel vaulted ceiling.
Yeah. Well, everything's original apart from the plywood. We had to put new plywood in so that it was all fire treated.
Did it actually have plywood?
Oh yeah. It was all. I mean, and it's in such good condition because the heating hasn't been off since probably the 40s anyway. So it's just been kept in a really good sort of time warp.
Yeah, that's why it survived so well, hasn't it?
I mean, it's nice and warm down here, and it's dry, and there's no real rusting or anything. So it's worked well. These are original beds. Yeah.
Does this floor slope uphill, or is it me?
I don't know. I never looked at it. I need to probably pour some water down and see what happens when it goes down there. But it's sort of So, I mean, the hospital was well equipped to cope with all the injuries that you would have had at that time. The war injuries.
Yeah, there's not a lot here, is there?
Well,
enough for take a leg off or something of that nature.
We were fortunate that we had all the photographs of what it looked like originally, and the Royal Army Medical Corps gave us all the artefacts to put back in. So what you see is real.
King George's wash hand stand.
We put some fake blood here, a bit of shrapnel that they would have got out of the wounds. And the commentary gives you the effect of an operation going on. So you get this, you get this background commentary of the surgeon talking to the nurses. Well, they would, if the leg had to come off, the leg had to come off, and that's what you'd use.
Anaesthetiating machine.
It needs more oxygen. Yeah, that's a sterile. So you break that and you take out the
catgut and needle.
Do the sutures.
Yeah.
And there's everything in here but the people. You've got the sounds, you've got the smell, because it smells like an operating theatre. We've got the smell of an operating theatre.
It does indeed.
And I mean, people come in and they faint because they see the blood. They get the smell and that's it. They're gone. So.
Are these lamps original? Or?
No, they're not. Funnily enough, we actually had those made. Well, I think they're quite good. I think they're good.
They look the part.
So this is one of the accesses to the regional war room. This was built in the 1940s, really because they ran out of space up above.
Yeah.
But it was used as a combined operations room.
Yeah.
And then when after the war, when the nuclear missile crisis happened with Cuba, they started to make it into a regional seat of government. So spent millions of pounds doing that, but really, eventually they stopped doing it. It was a bit of a waste of time. You only needed one direct hit on the cliff face.
The chalk up a bit.
And that would have been it, but it's a long way down.
Yeah. How far exactly are we below?
Well, we're about 150 feet now. We're down to probably the middle of the cliffs, but not quite the lowest level. There's another level of tunnels yet down on the basement.
Yeah.
This is the balcony for the secret wartime tunnels. Interesting thing here is that these are some of the oldest railings in the country. All the railings in World War II were all taken and melted down for guns, but these were here. But we got pictures of Vice Admiral Ramsay and Churchill and the King coming down here. They would come here because they could see France and they could see the war, and it's a really safe place to look at it. It's a viewing platform, It's
to the tunnels if things get going wrong.
Absolutely right. The tunnels behind us are the original casemates, and these, this goes back a fair period of time. But there are more tunnels down below.
Yeah, it's like a rabbit warren in there, isn't it?
Well, there's about 3.5 miles of tunnels. I mean, we've had a look at some of them. And you can easily get lost in there. And there are still more to open, and there's probably more that we haven't even found yet that we're still going to try and find.
A lot of people don't realise as late as, the nuclear crisis, there were great HQ down below underground.
Well, this is the whole thing about this castle. It goes from the Iron Age fort right the way through to the nuclear shelter bit, and and who knows? We've even stored all of the bits and pieces from the Channel Tunnel in here, so we still have a use. We still have a use.
What makes Dover so important is its location, and the places that castles were built were usually determined by geographical features. There's nowhere you can see this better than in Scotland, so I went up to Edinburgh to see Scotland's most famous castle. Edinburgh Castle stands on the sheer crag of Castle Rock, the core of an extinct volcano. It rises 435 feet above sea level, and it's a pretty formidable natural defence.
really, you couldn't build a castle on better foundations, you know, and so high up. That's the interesting thing, you know, on top of this volcano. I mean, even now, when you're down in town and you look up with all these escarpments that have been chiselled on the edge of the rock, it still looks a hell of a long way up. What it must have looked like before, when just this little bit was stuck right on top, you know. You can imagine the enemy turning up and just looking up in the sky and saying, sod it, we'll go. You know, we ain't going to have a do. The castle itself has had a long and complex building history. Really, they started off on top of the rock, and then when they ran out of space, they chiselled a ledge on, and like the 18th century bits, you know, on this ledge, and then there's another ledge with like the 19th century lot on it. It's rather like a great walnut whip. I don't think they'll let me in here again after I've said that. St Margaret's Chapel is the oldest building in the castle. It's rather ironic, really, that this is the oldest one and the newest one's just over there, the War Memorial. I mean, you can see why it's lasted 900 years when it's built on a foundation made of this stuff, you know. Once it were all molten, but, you know, it's set quite solid since. And I should rather think it's been struck with lightning once or twice when you think where we are, you know. It's actually 443 feet above sea level to where we are here, you know. Pretty formidable defence, really, you know. I wouldn't even like try and get in it these days with all the modern tattle. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the castle was a royal palace, and it became a symbol of royal power. And right up to today, Edinburgh is more than just an historic monument. It still has a symbolic significance, and that's why the Scottish National War Memorial is here. One of the most impressive buildings in the castle is this one behind me, you know. It's the Scottish National War Memorial, and it's also one of the most recently built. I mean, I've seen a few war memorials in my time, but believe me, this one takes some licking. I'm going to go inside and have a look round. Inside this war memorial, there's this magnificent bronze, you know, which depicts every branch of the 1914-18 war, you know, everything from the nurses to the tank regiment, you know, there's a great William Foster's tank in the background, you know. The aviators, at the end, you know, I read in a paper the other day that the life expectancy of a man with a flying machine in 1914 were 11 days, you know. Like Mr. Meredith Williams and his sister who created this wonderful bronze, they definitely captured the sadness and the reality of it all, you know, way back in 1927, I think it was constructed, this bronze. The wall of this bronze, first of all, would be carved in wood by Alice and Maurice Meredith Williams, you know, he must have been a Welshman, I think, before it was taken to the foundry, and of course, cast in bronze, and that, you know, that's how we see it today. This beautiful piece of green marble is the memorial proper, and it's standing right on top of the highest bit of Castle Rock, which is this bit here. And in this beautiful casket, there are the names of 150,000 Scots people who died in the 1914 war. You know, this casket is a magnificent piece of blacksmithing. You know, it isn't cast like, it hasn't been molten, you know, it's all been forged out of solid bars, you know, and even these pillars here, the man must have started off with a round bar with straight ridges in and then got it red hot and twisted it round, you know. And all these lovely faces, and every one's a bit different. Even all these little pinnacles here are all different. They've all been made by red hot and punching and different tools of these nice depression shapes and all, and it's like, that's the keyhole. Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, you know, considering the thing's so old, I think it were presented by King somebody or other to one of his queens. Long now, I've never been very good on fancy history, you know, but nevertheless, the guy who made it were a very, very clever blacksmith. There's also in here some magnificent carvings, you know, right above my head up there. That's St. Michael slaying the dragon, you know. In England it's St. George, but up here it's St. Michael. But it's a beautiful carving, and above him there's the angels blowing the trumpets, you know, representing triumph over evil. And of course all the lot were carved out of one great Scottish oak tree. People say, like, you know, they can't do work like that now, but all this memorial has been done in quite recent, well, you know, not that far long ago, 1920, 1927 period. So, you know, they're all proved wrong then, people who say you can't do that thing now, you know, they can't do work like that now. This is the Great Hall at Edinburgh Castle. James IV constructed it. The thing is, it's been much renovated, but one of the original bits is the great hammer beam roof above our heads. And if you study it, you know, it's quite magnificent. You know, it's built like the hull of a ship, but of course the other way around. I mean, it's got beautiful corbels and heads carved on all the things, and some lovely painting on all the great beams and bits and pieces. There's also some magnificent oak screens and this fine collection of weapons, you know, swords and guns. Edinburgh Castle is still actually, it's not like a castle in Wales, you know, with all rock rotting and grass growing on it. It's actually still used, you know, it's still a military base, and it's also used for government functions. I mean, this beautiful room here has recently been renovated and rejuvenated by Gregory and his team, and I think he'll be able to tell us something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose really the story starts back in about 1603 when James VI of Scotland became James I of England as well, with the Union of the Crowns. Now, James moved down to London and stayed there, but he did make one visit back to Scotland in 1617. And in advance of his return, the order went out that these rooms here had to be really brought up to standard.
Beautified.
Really brought up to standard for this very important king. And what we gather is, from various documentary sources, is that about 1615, the king's masters of works and all his tradesmen and craftsmen really set to inside these rooms and took them from being fairly barren, simple, plain rooms into something very much like this ornate style that you see around you now.
Yeah, it's very nice. Yeah. I notice you've got this piece of ancient plaster here that's exactly the same as the frieze around the top.
Well, this is quite interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, what we know is that after the king had come here, the rooms were put to various other uses, ranging from quartermaster stores to Ministry of Works tea rooms to museums. And then finally in 1970s, the early 70s, a bomb went off in the vaults down below us here. Now that caused a lot of damage to these rooms. It blew the stone vaults out, the floors up, and took a largest part of that north elevation away. But during the tidying up, this plaster fragment was found, and no one was quite sure where it came from or what it was, but it was recognised as being a plaster fragment of the Jacobean period. Now, people looked at this, and over the succeeding years, we were able to identify that this very same plaster pattern featured in a number of the grand houses around Edinburgh, and even further north, up to the likes of Craigievar and Aberdeenshire. And with some more research by a colleague of mine, Claire Lawrence, what emerged was that this had been part of the ornate plaster ceiling created for the king. And then when the plasterers had left, and when all the local noblemen had seen the effect and realised this was the latest fashion, you know, they had employed the plasterers up and down the length of the country to recreate this ceiling and this ornate plaster work in all their houses as well, you know.
Yeah, you can see all the grates and everything in it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's really well done, yeah.
So we were then able to take this detail, relate it to ceilings elsewhere, and then track the exact detail of this ornate strapwork ceiling that you can see above. Again, relating it to the documentary sources from the Masters of Works, we could see how many people were employed, the materials that they required.
Yeah, them are boards, aren't they? That are painted on all the way around. You know?
Yes, that's the softwood boarding there on which are painted the Stuart dynasty. So this is lending credence to
There's
James.
lots of examples in Scotland, isn't there, of beautifully painted wooden ceilings.
Oh, there are,
really,
yeah. I mean,
really
there are a great
nice,
many.
yeah.
I mean, there are some in Edinburgh and there are some out further north as well.
Yeah.
Many of them around.
Aye, and the floor, quarter sawn oak, not too long because they don't grow that high.
No, well, that's interesting. There's a story behind that one as well. When we were doing the research into the ceiling and in the panelling, we were also doing some work in the floors above this area here, in the other parts of the palace block of Edinburgh Castle, and we uncovered an original 17th century floor up on the floor above. And from that, we managed to get the pattern and the size and the scale of the boards that we would have used. So that we discovered that just at the right time, and we were then able to incorporate that information and that detail into the scheme that we've done here. You know?
Yeah, get plenty of tourists on them, whir them in there,
Yeah, I mean, they're superb quality timber. I mean, they're standing up
Oh,
extremely well, and all
it's
quarter
good stuff.
saw and all good stuff.
And the panelling, that of course is all new, is it? Recreated.
Everything is new.
Yeah,
Everything that you see here was recreated over the past couple of years. The panelling, again, it's from 17th century models.
Style.
But we knew that we were looking for an early 17th century ceiling, so we knew we'd have to meet early 17th century panelling. Again, we had the Masters of Works accounts, detailed inventories of time, labour and materials to go for. So by looking at other 17th century panelling that we knew about, we could build up a very clear idea of what it looked like.
Originally like.
And that's what you can see here.
Yeah, is this great fireplace like? Is it original? Or have it been?
Well, it's original sandstone.
Yeah,
It's painted marble in effect, but in fact it's actually a sandstone fireplace beneath
they've
that.
done a super job on it, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean it was a local.
It hoodwinks you quite well when you stood over there looking at it.
It's very well done. A local man, Mick Pryor, did it for us, using
wow.
feathers and all sorts of various mixes and secret techniques for doing it. And it really has taken what was a fairly ordinary sandstone fireplace and turned it into a piece of marble beauty. It really has.
I remember my days at art school. We did a few lessons on marbling.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. You just get it in backs of old books, didn't you? Really nice stuff. Yeah.
I'd love to be able to do it, but I think there's probably decades worth of practice in it.
This building behind me here is one of my favourites. It stems from when the castle became a garrison, and originally it was the governor's house, and then eventually it became the officers' mess, which it still is today. And of course, over to me right there is the actual barracks that the troops stayed in. The house over here behind me, the officers' mess, it's got a wonderful porch or entrance, which is all built on a lovely arch that spans a great gap that, covers like the cellars, I would rather think. Military tradition and pageantry are still very strong here. I've seen the tattoo many times on television, and I've always been impressed, and when I was on my visit, I had an appointment with a man who keeps another of these traditions going. That were exciting, that.
Hello, Fred.
Yeah, hello there, Tam. How are you doing?
Very well.
This is Tam the Gun, and every day for the last 21 years he's done that, Why do you do it,
Well, it's a tradition that goes back to 1861, Fred. They started it for shipping in the River Forth, so ships' captains could set their chronometers.
Yeah, it's a lovely gun, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's actually, it was designed in 1936, put into production 1939, and been going strong ever since.
Yeah, all riveted and all. It's a pity today we can't see the ball that's far away over there.
Well, that's,
does it go up or come
that's
down?
the famous Scotch mist.
Yeah,
the ball normally goes
yeah,
to the top, and when the gun
yeah.
fires, the time ball drops.
Tell you what, I found it quite exhilarating, that build up to 1 o'clock then, when I were leaning over there looking at my watch. You know, it were almost like when we're knocking a big chimney down, you know. Same exciting feeling, you know.
Well, we can certainly attract the tourists. We get about 600 to 800 tourists a day up here in the summer.
Yeah, so you've had a bit of an accident with it.
Well,
Bent it
just
for
a
you.
small
Court martial.
small touch.
Yeah, get your green paint out.
So you've never drawn one of these with your steamroller, I take it?
No. I'll tell you what. In 1914 war, Lord Roberts, he were in charge of transport, and he had a fleet of traction engines for pulling the big howitzers.
Yeah,
you know,
the
big
60
ones.
pounders. Yeah.
And there's other things about First World War. When you look at the pictures of the big guns, lots of them had traction engine wheels on that were commandeered from, you know, what the heck, a tank, Foster's at Lincoln, who made them early tanks. They also made traction engines, and you know, that was the main line, like.
Oh, these were very famous guns in North Africa in the Second World War, and really very temperamental. I've got 8 of them, and they're like women, they're very temperamental.
Last time I came, he had a few lined up.
Yeah, well, that was for the Queen Mother's Royal Salute,
Oh, when Queen Mother come.
You just stand there and give it a good welly, Fred.
Will do. I'll do that. You can imagine that in 1914.
You enjoy that?
Yeah.
Good. That's an 87mm cartridge.
Who fills them up again?
Certainly not me, I've got enough to do here. Good smell.
Yeah, many people have them outside a fireplace as poker stands, don't
Do they?
Some castles developed in a very different way. I've come here to the heart of England to have a look at Warwick Castle. Tell us a bit about, you go about getting in here.
Well, Master Frederick, you're well within archer range here.
Yeah, I know, it looks a
Closer
bit
than 200 yards, you're taking your life into your own hands. You should be wearing a steel helm.
Yeah.
If you look across the crenellations at the top of the castle, I have my men positioned in each of the archer loops to look down upon anybody who might attack the gateway.
Yeah, it's the thing is, once we'd got to the drawbridge, and presumably they'd have something made of wood for shelter behind a bit while they started work on it. Once you'd got that up and got to the portcullis, it'd be a bit tough even then.
Well, this actually, Master Frederick, is the strongest point of the castle, this barbican here.
Yeah.
A wider degree of archery fire upon any attackers. This is the strongest section.
Yeah, I know.
You'd almost be insane to attack here.
Yeah, once you've got through the portcullis, it's bad news, isn't it?
We will give you a review of those defences then, sir, if you wish to see them. So, as you see here, this would be a rising rising drawbridge, which was counterweighted through the barbican.
Yeah.
So, at the first sign of attack, I would call my men to raise the drawbridge and drop the portcullis.
So there's a big hole and then that big wooden gate to smash in.
Aye, sir. Do you wish to review that next section?
Yeah, come on. Yeah, once you got over the drawbridge, things were still far from pleasant, with all these slits up here.
Yeah, as you can see, Master Frederick, even now we're right in front of the gates, we're still in an archery crossfire. To the right here you have Guy's Tower, with all its many archery loops still facing down at you, and to the left you have Caesar's Tower here, and again you have many archery loops pointing right down into your troops.
Yeah, if you got as far as the portcullis, I think you'd look like a pincushion, wouldn't you?
You would. It's not only you've been a crossfire that way, the barbican itself has many arrow loops, and to either side while your men are in front of the portcullis trying to undermine it,
Yeah.
there's sally ports to either side of the Barbican, which allows men to storm out and into the attacker's rear and attack them from behind.
I think really we'd have been better digging a tunnel under one corner and putting a few props on to set fire to it.
Well, my lord, the Earl of Warwick, could employ such a mighty siege engineer as yourself.
Yeah, I've seen a model in Rochester Castle of the castle undermined when set fire to, and a great section of it collapses. And it's all there in a little model. Very
The art of
interesting.
mining and counter mining is an awesome feat
Yeah.
in siege engineering.
Yeah. Of course, they did have gunpowder, didn't they? And big guns.
They did, sir.
Yeah.
And truly, if my lord, the Earl of Warwick, was going to besiege a mighty fortress such as this, he would just form up his artillery in the town and bombard it into surrender.
Yeah, with big storms.
Yeah, huge things.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll advance a bit further into the pretending we've got through this one.
Right, Master Frederick, so now we're actually stood within the Barbican itself, and assuming that the enemy forces had made it through the mighty oaken doors that rest upon
These
these
gudgeons.
hinges there.
Yeah.
In fact, while they're trying to batter through those, if you look upwards, you're underneath murder holes, from which in the floor above people could pour boiling sand or quicklime or burning oil upon to the attackers.
Yeah, if it went inside your armour, it won't be funny, that
Oh
would
no,
it?
burning sand goes straight through mail,
Yeah.
and the quicklime can actually,
blind.
there's a corrosive, as you say, blind.
Yeah.
So now we've got through the oaken doors, and now we're into this area here, the central section of the Barbican, which is really a killing field.
Yeah.
For I would give the command to drop the portcullis, the outer one, and also the inner one in front, and then the archers above
my
in all
God,
in all the loops would fire down
Yeah.
into the stricken attackers who had got nowhere to run.
Yeah. No chance at all. Who shifted the bodies afterwards, you know?
A very unpleasant job.
Yeah, everywhere, them slots, aren't they, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, you have the inner part of the Barbican, all the windows facing, and then you're totally surrounded on all four sides.
Yeah.
And once you're actually shot down into the attackers to sort of break the back of their attack, then you've also got sally ports coming from the towers, and so you've doorways, the front and rear, where people can just flood out into the sides of the attackers.
Pretty impregnable, really, isn't it? I mean, I doubt whether anybody would get through it, you know, with hand saddle, you know, with swords and that. So well defended. I mean, look at them, we're up there, you know. God. No chance. We'd all be dead within minutes.
Assuming you've actually managed to live through the slaughter of the arrows pouring down on you from all sides, and you've managed to make your way through this inner portcullis, then the end is almost nigh. Almost. Because not only have you had to put up with all that, you've also got doorways surrounding this area.
I didn't like that. It's described as one of the best medieval castles in England. But what interests me is how it were converted into, you know, a place to live in. You know, behind these rather ferocious-looking walls, there's a beautiful country house. Yeah, like all good castles, you know, it seems to have been built in different periods, you know, which is the oldest bit, like.
Well, the oldest bit, Fred, is over there on the mound, you see, but that you're looking at the early 900s. But like all great castles, as you can appreciate, it's been built over centuries.
Yeah,
and the part that we're standing in now, you're looking at the 13th and 14th century as you go around.
these lovely walkways that go around the walls, you know, I suppose they could zoom from one wall to t'other to do the defending.
Fred, the
Well,
ramparts, the walkways, but they could be walkways, you're quite right.
Yeah.
But of course that's exactly it, because what people don't appreciate is that castles that were built as fortresses to begin with, it was only in the latter centuries that they became, you know, beautiful homes. But in the early part, of course, they were fortresses, not only to keep foreign invaders out, but to keep your own kind out as well, to a certain degree.
Yeah, well, we were all at war at once, weren't we, with the Welsh and the Scotch and all
well,
that.
that's right, Well, I mean,
I think rather than attempt to get through that portcullis down there and that gateway, would have been a lot easier to tunnel underneath and prop it up on sticks.
Fred, you must be an ancestor. You must have come back from that breed, because of course that's exactly what they did. I mean, the defence of this. How do you get into a castle like this? You've got an enormous ditch outside, which was twice as deep as you see it now. But you need to get up that bit. They do exactly what you do, Fred, today, and that is they'd tunnel in. And they'd get to the bottom of these towers and they'd knock a few stones out and set the fire underneath it and blow the tower down. And I think you still use the same similar thing today.
Yeah, I've seen a model in Rochester Castle of the very operation, you know, and took halfway under the wall, you know, and all propped up on sticks, and they've just lit it like. They're all running about with little pointed shoes on. Yeah, it's very good.
You know, when you talk about these ramparts, you see, and they're wide like a walkway, don't forget, because this castle is 1,000 years of age, I mean, it has seen a few battles, and of course they used to put cannon up here at one point in time as well, so you need it to be big. And I mean, these holes that you know, the matriculations that you see, I mean, that is a defence. You know, you keep the enemy out.
There'd be stacks of arrows and spears and all sorts up here, wouldn't there?
Oh yeah, no end.
Anyway, shall we ascend the tower?
Shall we ascend the tower? Now, have you got your sword on the right side, Fred? Because that's why the stairs go that way, so you can defend yourself. Well, as you can see, Fred, that as we've got to the top of this tower and you look out and you're lord of all you prevail, because it projects right out. I mean, you can see 2 or 3 counties on a clear day, but also if you look down below, if the enemy are attacking, you've certainly got a bird's eye view.
You've got, like, flanked on all sides, aren't you, with your bow and arrow, you know, sort of. Even in this day and age, you know, it'd be fairly hard to get in here, you know, with even if you had machine guns down below. You know, the enemy had the defenders have the same tattle. It'd be, you know, pretty handy.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's why Warwick Castle has really and truly has not been attacked under siege. It was under siege for a few days in the Civil War, but that's a few centuries ahead of the times we're talking about. But that's why, because it is impregnable. As you look out.
Are these for more boiling tar?
That certainly is. They're the murder holes. Can you? I mean, they threw everything down on top of you, as you know. Even some stuff that I think you use today, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, hot sand.
Hot sand. That's right. Yeah, they threw everything down there. Oh no, you didn't get into Warwick Castle unless you were invited.
Yeah, that's a fact.
You have it, Fred. You see this wonderful, strong defence of a castle, but of course there's a lot more to Warwick
inside
than this. Because inside I'm going to show you the elegance, the age of elegance, because we're going to go in and see how they lived from the Tudor times onwards, and certainly from James I, the Stuarts.
In
they
the newer
changed
bit.
it. The newer bit. There is a new bit, you know. The new bit here is about 1759, you know. One of the rooms, it's an extension, you'd call it today.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, we were talking about the new part of the castle where we're now standing in it, because this is the most elegant of dining rooms, as I'm sure you'll agree with me, 1763, and this is when these castles were at their height of fashion, to be entertained in this beautiful dining room. And of course, there have been many, many famous people dine here. I mean, they would give wonderful parties at this castle, weekend parties, and they would dress and they would come down here and they would sit, and they'd have about 12 or 14 courses. You'd have to eat well.
They'll only be small, though, won't they?
Well, they'd only be small, but you would be expected to try at least every dish, and you would drink 2 pints of wine and port each before you left.
Manage the wine bit.
You reckon you could? What's your tipple then? Is it red or white?
No, more red.
good for your art, so they say.
But they
you
did,
know.
because of course it was rude to refuse, because if you are master of your own home, you like to show your best, and they would in actual fact offer their best wine and expect you to taste
You
it.
couldn't get anything better than what's in here, could you? Beautiful.
Well, that's right. But don't forget, all you'd have to do is pamper yourself, because when you sat at this table, you'd have a footman stood behind you, because you had a foot, and you couldn't have been a footman here, Fred, because you had to be 6 feet tall to be a footman at Warwick Castle. But you'd stand here, you see, and in actual fact, if you wanted the salt, you just turn round and say, and they would pick it up and give it to you. This is the height of elegance and, of course,
Good
wealth
living.
and good living. You'd be able to undo a button of your waistcoat, because, of course, you do realise that Edward caused the fashion of the bottom button being undone.
Did he?
Oh, yes, of the
I'm
waistcoat.
all right.
So
You'll be
you're all right.
happy.
I noticed that earlier on, you see, Fred. But, of course, there have been many famous people here, and perhaps the most famous 20th century man in history, everybody knows him, was Winston Churchill.
Oh, aye,
but, of course, when he sat at this table, he was very, very young and weighed less than 100 pounds and didn't smoke those great big cigars that everybody thinks that he smokes today. But you would, when you came here for the weekend party, you would bring 16 changes of clothes, Fred. No boiler jackets.
Yeah. I don't think they'd let me in, you know.
Oh, they would, Fred. They would. They would let you in. But you'd have to take your cap off.
Yes.
Well, Fred, you've had your 2 pints of wine.
Feeling happy and rosy. Yeah.
In these rooms here, this is a posh name for these, are enfilage of rooms, Fred.
Oh, yes.
And we ladies would have gone into a little room there, and you men would have gone into the green room and had another brandy, and then you would have joined up with us ladies in this wonderful cedar room.
Yeah.
Now, as you can see, it's cedar from Lebanon.
Yeah.
You're looking at 1690, so it's over 300 years of age, and you can see the wonderful carvings. But, you know, I know the history of this room. I know the people that have been in this room over these hundreds of years. But how the devil did they actually do this sort of panelling and put it up on the walls,
Well,
Fred? Yeah, that's
first
right.
of all the framing for the actual panels will be made on a bench, you know, and all the carving will be done on a bench, of course. And then there'd be studding or timber nailed to the surface of the stonework, or even built into it, you know, and then the panelling afterwards were nailed on, or the framing for the panelling. You'll find that them panels really are quite free to move and expand inside the frame, like they are in a door, you know, in somebody's front door. Well, when they made front doors proper, not like they make them now, it's a cardboard, like when they did real woodwork. And of course, even in ceiling up there, underneath all that the great difference in height in between centre and the main bit, if you were to smash away the plaster, you would definitely come to some timber that would all be up there, and then they'd sort of float on the bigger moulds with like a template up there in situ by, you know, first of all building it up rough, and then another layer and another layer, and then finally all the little bits would be stuck on and pinned onto it, and hence, you know, that lovely ceiling that we've got there now. And then quite a few £100 worth of gold leaf.
Is that how they do it? I find it extraordinary, Fred. I think of you of blowing up towers, and yet you know so much about...
Well, I used to be a joiner, you know, when I left school till I was 22 years old. And doing things like this, without the carving, of course, was part of it. And, of course, it's enabled me at home to do, you know, all my woodwork in my own house at home. And it's strange as it may seem, my bedroom has got American red cedar panelling all the way around the walls.
I find it, don't you find it's strange that you're standing here talking about this, and yet a man like you 300 years ago, and no doubt he was a working man like yourself, did all this?
Oh, and it's so beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
you
is,
know,
it's lovely.
Like the ceiling.
How the devil did they do the ceiling then?
When I went to art school, they had a plastering section. It's true. And they did things like this. I mean, you know, we go to so many places and people say, ain't it a pity they can't do that now? But it ain't true, you know. They can really do nearly everything that the old-timers did. And they used to do this fancy plastering. And although I never did any myself, I kept a good eye on them when they were performing at the beauty and, you know, all this flowing, curly, swirly bits and leaves and all that. And they used to build up like frames out of timber and lats, and sort of the great difference in between the ceiling up there and the bottom of the greatest moulding.
there'd possibly be wooden framing up there and like with little light lats nailed all round it, and then they'd slosh some backing on fairly thick, and then they'd have templates for the shape of all the big moles that are going round, and possibly a centre in there, and have the template on the end of a long arm, you know, like a set of compasses.
Yeah, yeah.
And they'd keep swinging it round, and one guy would be sticking the plaster on, and they'd end up with that beautiful sweep all the way around. And then, of course, later on, when they were getting to top coat finish style, they'd put all the ornamental bits, which will be made down below, like stick 'em on. And that is how that were made, you know, definitely.
Well, I say...
And, of course, there's a few £100 worth of gold leaf on it as well.
There it is.
Up there, you know, like all that would have been, the bigger parts of it would have been actually made and floated on with like templates, and then all the little fancy bits stuck on, you know. Brilliant piece of workmanship, you know.
It's wonderful. Yeah. This is a lovely room. It's you know, you can feel how many men have worked in it, and the blood, sweat, and tears perhaps that went into it.
Yeah, that fire surround's magnificent, isn't it? I mean,
well, there's a story about that fire surround because it's Adams style. It's an Adams, and I'm told that the egg. Can you see the egg?
Yeah,
and the inverted arrow.
Egg and dart.
That's right. Beginning and end of life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, well, you see, I've learnt something from you today, and you've learnt something from me.
Yeah. This is really my period, the beauty and splendour of it all, you know. It's always like there'd been a maintenance man here, you know. It must have been very pleasurable coming to work every morning and fettling bits of furniture up. Now then, I believe you've got a squeaky caster somewhere.
Oh, Dibnah. Remove your cap, please.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Would you have a look at this, sir? I think there's something wrong with the caster down there.
Right, I'll have a go. Hey. If I get this job done in time, next week we'll be seeing some more nice houses and palaces. In 1282, the Welsh prince, Llewellyn ap Griffith, felt strong enough behind his strongholds at Dolbadern and Dolwyddan to defy English authority and assert his independence. It was a situation which King Edward I refused to tolerate, and he was determined to obtain Llewellyn's submission by force of arms. Campaigning in Wales wasn't going to be as easy as Edward had imagined. The whole place was heavily wooded, and it took 2,000 men to clear a pathway through the woods for Edward's armies. Edward fought two very hard and violent wars in Wales, and he finally won when Llewellyn got killed in a minor skirmish, and he was determined never to have to fight the Welsh again. He decided on Europe's most ambitious medieval building programme. Like the Normans before him in England, he would subdue the Welsh with castles. Work started on 3 castles, Harlech, Caernarfon and Conwy. But it wasn't just castles that were built. At Conwy and Caernarfon, the castle was put into a walled town, an idea borrowed from Gascony in southern France, where Edward had been Duke. And that isn't all Edward borrowed from France. For all his castles here in Wales were actually built by a Frenchman called James of St. George. Master James of St. George came from St. George d'Esperance in Savoy, which is where he got his name and where he came up with a design for a whole new style of castle while he was working as the king's architect. To understand the great advances he made in castle building and design, we have to start with a castle that the Normans had built in England 150 years earlier. Even back then, the French built the best castles. This is Edingham Castle in Essex. It was built for a Norman lord, Aubrey de Vere, in the 12th century. Aubrey wanted to make his castle look rather posh, so he put an outer skin of dressed stone on it, you know, no doubt to impress his friends and maybe his enemies as well. You can see it's quite thin, really. It doesn't There's no headers in it and nothing, you know. In fact, considering it's so old, it gives you a false impression. It always almost looks as though the Victorians did it, you know. It's so neat and tidy. Really, you get a better idea of what holds the place up downstairs in the undercroft. Here I am down in the undercroft, and here, really, you can see what's holding the whole thing up. Not a lot, eh? It's really the mortar, you know. I mean, there's more mortar than there is stone, actually. And really, it's a credit to the men who mixed it, you know, because it's still quite solid after all these hundreds of years. There must have been more mortar mixers than there were stone fixers, because it looks as though they put the outer skin on the outside, which is beautiful dressed stone, and then they must have maybe built 18 inches of pebbles and flints, and then chucked the mortar in, and as they were doing it, threw the stones in. You can also see down here a great pillar that's 14 feet square, and it goes all the way up to the arch above, and it takes the thrust of the whole weight of the building. In fact, the castle is built round a huge arch that runs right up its centre. This is a cross-section of Edinburgh Castle Keep, and as you can see, most of it's arches. But for these arches to stay up, you know, they're going to have something pretty big and substantial for them to spring off. You know, unlike a normal bridge from one headland to another, you need, you know, plenty of meat on each side to take the thrust of the arches. Down in the undercroft, which is the equivalent to the cellar, the walls are actually 14 feet thick, with all this great weight of arches pressing down on them. On top of that, you've got the weight of a floor, plus, you know, I don't know how many knights and noblemen sat around the great table eating the venison and all that. So you don't want it falling in, do you, you know. And then the arch over the banqueting hall is the biggest Norman arch in all of England, and something like 28 or 30 feet across. This is where the great arch emerges out of the wall. Really, you don't really appreciate the arch until you look at the great expanse of the floor above. If they hadn't built it, they would have had to search around for a tree maybe 50 feet long and 2'6" square or something like that, which I'd rather think it were easier to do the arch than find such a tree. A keep like this would have been very sound, and the solidity of its structural work can't be faulted. You can see how thick the walls are all the way up to the top. So when Master James came along with his new ideas, it wasn't the actual building techniques that he tackled. It was the overall shape of the castle and its outer defences that he set out to improve. Until this time, the keep had formed the heart of the castle. It housed the lord of the manor and was built on a mound of earth called a motte. Next to this there was the outer stockade where everybody else lived, which was called the bailey. And the bailey had a wall round it with a gate in it. And of course the gate were the most weak bits of all the lot. And if you knocked the gate down, the enemy were in and all the defenders had to run and hide in the keep. What Master James did was to move the keep to the gate and rechristen it the Barbican. And what he did next was to do away with the mottes altogether and build a series of towers round the outer wall. This made the castle much more defendable. If you did manage to breach the walls or gain entry through the Barbican, you could be fired at internally, you know, by the defenders who would be all on top of the walls and in each of the towers. You can see this at the first of his castles, which was Harlech. It's the most defensive of Master James's works, and this is hardly surprising when you think that they started building it while Edward was still at war with the Welsh. This side of the castle, without a doubt, is the best one to show its various stages of construction. Like if you look at the bottom part of the main wall, it's quite rough masonry, you know, possibly done by the soldiers themselves while still being fired at by bows and arrows. And then later on, when they got that up, it looks to be maybe 25 feet high or thereabouts. When they got that up, you know, they'd have a bit of protection for themselves, and of course later on they'd be maybe better and proper masons who built the remainder of the wall, like the top 30 or 40 feet, is much nicer, smoother stonework than the bottom bit. And then of course the curtain wall or the outer wall will be erected later on when they had more time, and if the enemy did approach they could always run and leave the trowels and the buckets of mortar for, you know, for next time, as you might say. But it is a good example here, you know, even the bases of the towers, the great big rocks just whizzed in roughly on the end on the same line as the rougher flat part of the wall. The key to the success of the castle is this staircase, which rises 200 feet from the sea. Well, it did do before the sea receded over there. It didn't really matter if the Welsh held siege on the front or the land side of the castle. Necessary supplies could be brought in by boat, and so they could keep, you know, the Welsh at bay forever. It's up this staircase once. There must have been an army of men carrying bags full of flour and all sorts of things. And I rather think by the time they got to the top, they'd be a bit knackered, without a shadow of a doubt. I think that's why they've got this plank here for sitting on. It stops them being being knackered, like I am. Yeah. From this angle you can see the way the rock had to be dug away to set the foundations of the castle directly onto the solid rock. It's as if the castle was hewn out of the rock itself. Having built the castle on top of a large cliff overlooking the sea, this left the inland side of it rather vulnerable to attack, you see. And to remedy this serious problem, they dug this huge gorge behind it in solid rock. And I mean, I rather think using the natural cleavage of the rock and iron wedges and big hammers, they shifted an immense amount of material. And without a shadow of a doubt, it's a wonderful feat of engineering and rock removal. And this is how they did it. First of all, they got an hammer and some form of a drill, and then they proceeded to drill an hole in the rock. When the hole's sufficiently deep, you then insert a pair of slips, or some people call them feathers, or 2 lumps of iron down the hole, and then a big iron wedge which you insert between the 2 metal plates, and this of course has a nice sliding action when you beat it with the hammer, you know, and opens up a great crack, and off will come a great slab of rock. Hopefully we'll get a big lump, you know. As you can see, it's not as easy as it sounds. Not brought a big enough hammer. I don't know about building a wall, but there's a few more slates for my roof. Really, that was partially successful, but I think they'd have had bigger and better tools than what I've got. But I still wouldn't like to have done that all day long, would you? The whole place was built in less than 8 years. They must have been as busy as ants, you know. There's lots and lots of evidence of how it were all held together and how it were all done. I mean, over here there's a great row of holes that once supported the roof timbers for this lean-to building that goes along here. Like down here there's some interesting corbels that have obviously been made to take beams that were stuck up against the wall. You know, they've got very interesting hook pieces on the ends of them, stop the timber like falling off or being dragged off possibly. You know, like the weight of the roof would have kept it tucked in. And then on this tower There's a magnificent row of incline putlog holes that they scaffold in, or the slanting platform to drag up the stones as they built the tower. They're still there. Yeah, it's all very interesting. Here, of course, you can see how thick these walls really are in this window hole. Like, I'll do a bit of measuring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, almost 14 feet thick. Yeah, it's quite something. No wonder really there's passageways in the walls, you know, all around the castle nearly. They maintained this thickness of 14 foot. We know a lot about the construction of Edward I's castles because they kept very detailed records. And here at the Public Records Office, I've got David Carpenter to tell me all about them.
What this is, it's the account of the controller, the person in charge of the money at Harlech, really for 1286. And it's extraordinary because it actually gives you a wonderful picture of the numbers of people working, the different rates of pay. So you see, very helpfully in the margin, they actually told us who the various craftsmen were with these little sort of lines. Cement, masons, QRR, quarriers, people digging the great ditches, my namesakes, the carpenters, then you've got the smiths, then you've got these, this is where I would be, not you, Fred, the minuti operarii, the labourers.
How much sort of money did they get for the labours?
Well, the roll certainly tells us that, and it's very, very variable rates. So someone skilled like you, Fred, might get 3 shillings a week. So shall I pay you for that then?
Yeah.
I'll be the controller, and let's scatter some 13th century money around. How much do you think you're worth?
Well, I'm a top rank
Are you sure? You're sure about that, are you? You're sure you're not one of these little labourers?
I made 6 stones today.
If you were a mere labourer, you'll be getting one of those, and possibly a half. But you think you're better than that, do you?
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, look, we'll tell you what, we'll give you your 5pence a day. As a top mason,
Thank
you
you.
keep that safe and don't spend it in the Harlech pubs.
And would there be an ale allowance as well? Would there be?
I fear not. No, you'd have to spend your own. Actually, that's a fascinating thing about all this, that you couldn't, because this is so valuable. I mean, if you think of, if that's that's the only currency, you couldn't actually go into a pub and buy yourself a drink because the money would be worth too much. I mean, that's a day's pay.
Yeah.
So you probably had to do that by barter.
Yeah, I suppose from this document you can actually tell how many men, you know, worked at any period in time on the
Yeah, you actually
castle.
can, and it is very, very seasonal building work, I suppose then as now.
Oh, right.
Probably. If we go back to when this roll was begun, in a very, very cold January, you see there's actually only one mason working. He seems to be doing a sort of special job. And then suddenly, Sunday, the 21st of April, to Philip Runn and Thomas Del Meded with 29 masons and then their pay. So suddenly a gang of masons has arrived under Philip Runn. But that's only the start of it. Because if we go on into July, spring and summer, lovely and warm, they've got 225 masons working. So it's gone up by about 200.
There's like another thing you've got to think about, the constant threat of the enemy.
Well,
Like
of course, absolutely
once
right.
they'd got it up so it could be defended,
Yes.
they could go off and do one somewhere else.
In this very tense period, you sometimes get workmen being moved from one part of Wales to another under armed guard. Very, very tense and dangerous. And I should think I'd be jolly pleased to be one of those workmen to get out of it at the end of the year, take my little pouch of money home and get back to where I'd come from.
The most impressive of King Edward's castles was Caernarfon, because here what he built was more than just a castle. Edward decided that Caernarfon was going to be the centre of his administration in Wales, so the castle here will be his royal palace, a symbol of English dominance over the Welsh he had just defeated.
Caernarfon is built on a spot very close to the old Roman fort of Saguntium, which of course had connections with the famous Roman Emperor Constantine, who were a bit of a rebel really, because he captured in the end the Roman Empire with a British army, and of course was responsible for building the city of Constantinople. When Edward decided to build Caernarfon, he got Master James, his chief architect, to purposely mimic the stripes on the walls of Constantinople.
The castle would be the HQ of his English empire, right in the place that the Romans had theirs.
Work began here in 1283, when Edward was still at war with the Welsh. Here once stood a row of houses that it took 20 men a week to demolish and get rid of the timbers and the debris. But they still made a bit of a mistake. They only brought the walls up at this point to about 12 and 20 odd feet. Edward really relied on the strength of the town walls to keep the enemy at bay, but in 1296 they broke through, the Welsh broke through, and of course this business of 24 foot here were really no opposition to them at all, you know, they soon gained entry.
So once the revolt was put down, they increased the height of these walls and the King's Gate was built to guard this entrance.
Really now, when you look about in here, it's a great void and an open space. But if you're very observant and you look around, you know, you can obviously see that the whole centre of here were once full of buildings, some of which never got built actually. Once there were plans for a magnificent kitchen, but I'm afraid it never came to be. But you can actually envisage how it were going to look, you know. I mean, over there's a great kneeling stone for an arch which would, if it had been built, terminated about here. All the noggins for the tying in stones for the individual walls are all still there. There's the ancient answer to a waste disposal unit. The ovens and everything are there. But apparently it ended up no more than a wooden lean-to. And I think they run out of money actually. Over here on my left is all that remains of the once great hall. If you have a close look at it, you can see the holes where the roof timbers were. The kneeling stones for the hammer beam roof trusses and the holes for the timber are all there to be seen, and I believe that particular part of it got done. I mean, you can imagine that once in here, full of buildings and people rushing about, all the keystones or the keying stones for walls coming at 90 degrees from the actual castle walls, and here again the corbels for the roof trusses. And I don't really know whether that got done, but there's obviously all the preparations been done for it. And then round this corner here, a lovely plinth or skirting board at the outer edge, which of course would have followed the bases of the buttresses and round corner right up to the other corner. I suppose there'd be a lovely window frame somewhere in the middle there. And really, once this particular bit must have been a beautiful building that's now gone. It's rather sad in a way.
The layout of the castle was not the only defensive feature that Master James designed.
As you can see, in between these two big towers, there's quite a short length of castle wall. This wouldn't have been able to be defended properly by single arrow loops. So Master James came up with an ingenious solution. He did these like 3 entrances all into one. So if you imagine 3 crossbowmen, like one stood here firing that way, twang, and then another one up here, twang, and then another one down here, like twang. It'd be like all that crossfire down below. Like the enemy looking up at the walls would just see one slot. And he'd imagine if he stood in between these 2 slots, he'd be safe. But he wouldn't. He'd get caught in a deadly crossfire like a medieval machine gun.
But to really understand the castle's defences, you need to go up the Eagle Tower.
From up here on top of this tower, you can really see how Master James's defences worked. Over there on that side, we've got the sea, and over here on this side, we've got the river, deep and wide, you know, which would have kept the enemy at bay for quite some time. And then, through here, we've got the castle itself, which of course has got 2 lines of defence. Once had a great wall across the middle, which of course somebody's knocked down, so it's one big castle now, but in the olden days it used to be 2 in a way. And then, round here, there's the town wall, which of course follows the shoreline and then turns right inland, and were once upon a time connected with the castle over there on the far corner. It would have been really a heck of a place to take. Yeah, these rather eroded pieces of stone sticking up on top of the battlements were once beautiful eagles, you know, hence the name the Eagle Tower. You know, now they've got to this awful eroded state, and they almost look like human from down below, you know, as though the king wanted to make it look as though there were more defenders than there really were. You know. The whole weight of the roof on the Eagle Tower rests on these two great stone corbels, you know, this one here and that one over there. This magnificent roof truss with the main beam of it is roughly 45 feet long and 2'6" square, you know. Must have been a heck of a job finding a tree that big. The thing is that if you imagine downstairs in the Great Hall, a series of maybe 10 of these resting on them corbels, very similar to this, it must have been quite a magnificent sight. Alas, they've all gone. King Edward were finding it very expensive building all these castles here in Wales, and he'd got to find a way of keeping a better eye on his money. So he got this gentleman over here to invent really the prototype of the modern calculator. Now, David, how does it...
Good day, my lord.
It looks very technical to me. You know,
I'm afraid I can't take the credit for the invention of it.
Oh, you didn't
This was
invent
brought
it.
in from the Arabic world. But it's a recent invention into England, introduction.
Yeah.
It's an exchequer board, and it's used for calculating large sums of money. Say, for example, we wish to add the sum £23,000 to £28,000. A lot of money. You'd run out of fingers. You'd run out of peasants. So we use an exchequer board like this. It's got a series of lines on it, units, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, 20 of thousands. And you place counters on the lines. In this case, we've got 3 on the 1,000 line, 2 on the 10,000. So that's 10, 20, 3,000. On this side here, 10, 20, 30, 35,000. Say we wanted to add those two figures together. We simply merge the counters together. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is equal to a 5,000 piece, which is up on the middle line. So those can be removed. 2 5s make a 10, which goes up to the top. And there we have the sum.
What's the sticks for?
The sticks tally sticks. You've heard of the system to tally up. Well, this was a way of maintaining a record. Marks would be placed upon a hazel twig, a flattened hazel twig carved down, and marks corresponding to the amount owed would then be marked on there as a record. And to prevent fiddling, as people then were, as they are today, they would fiddle it. What you would do, you would split the stick down the middle.
Hang on, where's your hammer?
There we go.
And one party would keep one, and the
I
other.
would keep one side, one would come to the other, and then would come the day of reckoning when we would tally up. And
there's
the two would
no
be
way
added
can
together.
Can anybody cheat on that?
Because if an extra mark
even
was added,
the irregularities of the cuts are better than today. That's really, isn't it?
And then, as today, if weather got bad, you could always burn the books. And it was using methods like this that Edward, our Lord and King, was able to keep track of the vast sums of money needed to pay for the castles.
Spending on his castles, what I notice you've got a grand array of dies and stamps, haven't you? The same as the coins.
Those are the dies for making the coins. Those dies would be used.
If you're getting a bit short, you could knock a few of your own. Edward's castles were very expensive, weren't they?
That's right. All 10 castles together worked out at about £78,000. Now that's represented on the board like this by this little group of tokens here. Got 3 on the 1,000 line, a 5, 2 tens, and a 50. So 50, 60, 70, 5, 6, 7, 8, 78,000.
And that's just for the castle?
That's for the 10 castles, But the cost of his wars with the Welsh. Now, the first war cost him £23,000. So we've got 10, 20, 1, 2, 3. That's 23 there. That's Cost of his first war. The second war was £80,000.
Oh, minute.
I think the Welsh had learned a bit by then.
Oh, spent
Cost them a lot more. Now, 80,000 is this group here. So we've got 10, 20, 30, and one in there making 80. So his total cost for his wars was, if we add them together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So one goes up to there. Those 4 come off. That goes to go with that one. That comes off. £103,000 just for the wars.
Ooh.
Whereas the castles only cost 78,000.
And most of the wall's gone, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, David.
You're welcome, my lord.
I hope you get your sums right, or the king might be a bit upset.
Well, it's my neck on the block if I don't.
See you later.
Goodbye, my lord.
Caernarfon took nearly 50 years to build, and at nearly £20,000 it was the most expensive of all of Edward's Welsh castles. The total cost of them all was over £78,000, but as his wars there had cost him £103,000, the castle seemed like a good investment. Even so, the cost of them coupled with Edward's wars in Scotland was making a bit of a dent in his finances. And there's nowhere better to see this than just across the Menai Straits on Anglesey. This is Beaumaris, and its design is the most technically perfect in the whole of Britain. It would have been Master James's greatest masterpiece, but the king ran out of money and he couldn't afford to finish it. Like Caernarfon, it has layers of walls within walls, but unlike Caernarfon, it is perfectly symmetrical, and the wall site is surrounded by a moat filled with a controlled supply of tidal water. This was the state of the art of the 13th century.
The sea, of course, is now quite a long way off over there, but a similar thing happened as happened at Harlech. You know, it receded. At one time of the day, it actually came through a channel right up here into the harbour. Like Harlech, it had its own protected harbour, which of course kept Beaumaris supplied with the necessary supplies, as you might say. But it were very cleverly done, you know, it were fed by a freshwater stream which could be controlled through sluice gates, and a boat weighing as much as 40 tons could sail in here and unload at that little opening over there. Another brilliant idea James of St George came up with was the fact that when the tide went out, the whole contents of the moat and the harbour or the dock could be contained through a series of sluice gates or lock gates. And of course behind me there's a small round tower that contained a tide mill. So when the sea had gone out to its furthest, they could let the contents of the dock go and grind their own coin, you know, to keep, you know, all the soldiers happy. Plenty of jam butties. When the tide receded, the water level in the dock could be maintained by a lock gate, which must have been somewhere over there. And of course, any ship or boat that were in here being unloaded would of course be still floating and in the right position of being unloaded at that archway in the wall of the castle, which is just behind me.
There are no less than 4 successive lines of defence built into this castle.
Even if you did manage to battle your way over the drawbridge, and then under 3 sets of death holes, people pouring red hot boiling tar down into your chain mail, and you eventually arrived in here, this was just another death hole in a way, but a lot bigger, because all round there's all arrow slots everywhere behind you and over there, and you've got to fight your way through all of that lot. They'd be raining down on you like red hot bloody knitting needles, and then you went round this corner here and you've got to go through all the same thing again. If you managed to survive the drawbridge and the first set of murder holes and various doors, and you finally got to here, if you didn't look like a pincushion, there was yet one more great door with 6-inch square box of oak behind it, holding it closed, and then just 4 foot further in, a portcullis, which you would have to get rid of, possibly made of iron with great big rivets through, and then God forbid, another 4 sets of murder holes, and then another door, and another portcullis, and then another door. I don't think anybody could have ever actually managed to get through this lot. But it's not until you enter the heart of Beaumaris that you get an idea of the sheer scale of its defences. If you succeeded in getting this far, which I very much doubt you would, you're still not won. You wouldn't be able to get at the king, because the rest of the soldiers would be round the walls and arrows would be raining down on you one more time. So you'd still not won. You'd got to cross the wall centre here and take the building over there with the king in it. In fact, the castle was surrendered twice in its history, but it was never ever taken by any form of assault. The scale of Beaumaris is incredible. Through the gates of its protected harbour, over 2,000 men shifted more than 32,000 tons of stone. They mixed more than 2,000 tons of lime mortar and nailed over 100,000 nails into more than 3,000 boards, and all that was done in just 1 year. When James of St George and the king built these castles, spirit levels hadn't been invented. If you go around and look at the moat and look at the bed joints of the masonry, it's perfectly level with the water. There wouldn't be any water, of course, in the moat when they built the place. And the only things they had were things like this. Basically a stick, the piece of string with a lead weight on the end, and of course a nice hole that received the lead weight, and a line drawn up the middle. And of course, when you put it on the wall like that, if the wall is plumb, the lead weight will hang perfectly central in the hole, you see. If it leans, of course, you know, the wall, the ball's in the wrong shot. And that's how they got everything vertical. I mean, you can actually compare it with a modern spirit level, and of course, you know, bang on, you see, it's perfect. We've not improved that much, really, have we? If they wanted to get the stones perfectly level, like the ones round by the moat, they needed a piece of tattle similar to this, that sort of, you know, you could put it on top of every maybe 2 stones and it would register, you know, very accurately whether they were level or not. Here it is in this arrow slot that's near 700 years old, and it's still perfectly level, or near enough. I would think maybe about 1/4 of an inch out. This here behind me is all that remains of the once grand gatehouse, you know, the inner gatehouse. And of course Charles II issued orders to demolish it. As you can see, he didn't get so far, you know, he got the top bit off okay, but I think when he got to here they must have give up, you know, I mean, no doubt they had no dynamite in them days. In a way he did us a favour, because he sort of shown us how the wall's really built, you know. The fact that there's beautiful dressed stones on the outside with nice narrow joints, and then in the middle it's just big lumps of all sorts thrown in with a great deal of mortar, you know, but they made sure there were no real voids in it, you know. And of course over the back here there's 2 lines of inclined holes which would have contained the put logs with an inclined plane on it. As the wall advanced upwards, they left a stone missing, stuck a piece of wood onto the top of the wall they'd already built, and then tied a fir pole or a tree trunk to the other end, and then put boards across, which of course to enable them to raise the materials to the top of the wall as it advanced in an upward direction. They did have cranes, but they were too slow, and I don't think they would have delivered the necessary amount of materials up to the top of the wall. So they devised like the inclined plane, where maybe 2 or 3 men could drag a box full of mortar up. The thing is, I still use basically the same methods today. It's much easier to drag an heavy weight than it is to actually lift it up and carry it, because you'd have to go out and get a crane or an helicopter nowadays to get something high up. But if it's of a reasonable weight and it can be dragged along, you know, on some sort of sledge, it's a lot cheaper. It might be a bit slower and more inconvenient, but it still works. Beaumaris was never finished. It was so incredibly expensive, the king just simply couldn't afford it. I mean, when you look around and see the amount of chambers and staircases and fireplaces there are compared with the other castles, you can see the reason why. And it never really got any further than this level here, and that were 20 years after the king had died. The king died in 1307, closely followed by James. Beaumaris really is a monument to the great dreams that they had. They both had ideas of grandeur, but not the money or the time. That's the reason, really, that the thing's unfinished. Time and tide waits for no man, not even the king.
But you have to admit that together they built something that changed the face of Britain. And in the castles of Edward I, Master James of St George has left us with some of the most impressive structures in the world.
Over the years, most of our castles have changed. They've had bits added on and bits knocked off. They've been turned into barracks and country houses. And really, if you want to see some of the best examples of castles that look more or less what they must have looked like when they were first built, Wales is the place to come to.
Conwy is a classic example of the invincible medieval castle.
Edward I was by far our greatest castle builder, and his memorial is the great chain of 8 great stone fortresses that he built here in North Wales in a short space of 25 years. It was the greatest feat of royal building in British history.
The castles were a symbol of Edward's power, and they were designed to provide him with an ultimate weapon against any threat of a Welsh uprising. Their defences needed to be very sophisticated, so to carry out the work, Edward employed a Frenchman, James of St George, who was the greatest military architect of his age. And it was in these outposts of English power that the medieval art of castle building reached its peak.
They were all built to withstand any pounding from any siege weapon that had been devised at the time, and also made any form of attack difficult and dangerous. There are 8 main towers, but if you look closely, there are 4 more smaller towers on top of the ones at this end of the castle. These were the king's quarters, and the only way into it, it's really two arms, the only way into the king's quarters were by first battling your way through the main body of the castle, and the other way were by sea. As you can see, it would have been a heck of a job to scale these walls, especially with people pouring boiling tar down on you and the likes, throwing all sorts of stuff, bows and arrows. It's not as though you could dig underneath the thing because it's all based on completely solid rock.
The structure is a piece of monumental engineering on a grand scale, a massive achievement for its time. And when you look closely at the walls and the towers, you can get some clues as to how the place was built.
That's a big stone, that.
Apparently, when they built these castles, in between all the flat level decks of scaffolding, they have these inclined planes that they actually dragged the rocks up. And of course, it's a bit odd when you study castles and you look at them. There's some of them don't appear to have any putlog holes at all in. That's these little black holes where a piece of timber, a short length of wood called a putlog, went in. And of course, tied to the end of it, there were fir poles or tree trunks, for want of a suitable name, and of course lashed with rope, and then the planks rested on the putlogs. They just sawed the things off as they were retreating back down again. And then of course all castles were nearly all like cement rendered and lime washed.
And you can imagine them cement rendering over the end of a bit of wood, and then 500 years later, the wood rotting away, and some of them look like currant cake. There's that many of these putlog holes in them. Right, good morning, Neville.
Morning, Fred.
This is it, the main gate?
This is it. This is really it. And there's really such a wonderful history about you here. This castle, Fred, is very different to castles in England. Norman castles built by William the Conqueror, but not this one. This king, coming back from the Crusades in 1280, had found a castle in France with a barbican, and this was near Lyon, St George's d'Esperance. So thrilled he was, he brought the architect, a certain Master Mason James, to build this castle. So I really must tell you what a barbican is. You've just come past a drawbridge in a portcullis. You've not realised you've come where there was a passage with a roof, and the roof had holes in it, murder holes, soldiers on the roof dropping stones, spears, buckets of hot liquids on you. You were being massacred in the passage. And you were kept in with a couple of doors there at the top of the steps.
You know, like a bit like a rat trap.
But if you fought your way through it, you were worse off if you came here. These holes were for arrow slits, a crossfire arrows across the gateway here. There were arrows coming from the top of the towers as well, and a floor on these stones. They're called corbels.
Corbels,
Well, there was a wooden floor, but there was a wall protecting the floor, and there were holes in the floor. Stones, spears, buckets of tar, all dripping on your head here. Another great iron gate came down these grooves here, and then there were doors. So this and this were hinges for that half door. This and this were hinges for the other half, which made it, the castle was never taken. It was impregnable.
No, we've been outside and seen that.
Absolutely. The Welsh attacked it. Once the king was besieged in here 7 weeks in 1294. He couldn't get out because that river was in flood. There was no way he got out. And an army came from Chester to free him. And that's when he said, we haven't enough castles. And he went to Anglesey and built Beaumaris. That was 9 years after this one, and in Anglesey.
And this is the only way in, and the other way is by water.
And that was by water, and really that was meant just for the king's personal use. Everyone else, this main gateway here. So after we've got through this portcullis and these doors, we're ready to go in the castle. And it's in two sections. The outer wall takes us to the far wall, and that housed all the soldiers. And that's why the castle's here. It's for soldiers. But the other side of that wall, the king would come annually. He'd spend 3 or 4 weeks in this castle, using it as a base. You notice, therefore, that the battlements here have got these arrow loops. The battlements there, as well as the arrow loops, have got the high turret. And that really was for two reasons. They could put their flagpoles on there and indicate to the Welsh that they're here. And of course, it was an observation point to watch for the Welsh coming down from the hills. So the king's part is much higher because of those great turrets on there.
Before they could get to the king, they battled their way through the lads, as you might say.
Which didn't make it easy. Which didn't make it
easy.
That's
also the highest end, isn't it, if you go outside?
Yes, and quite a drop down to that river on the other side, which was, of course, the king's entry. This was for everybody else coming in this way.
Yeah, there's evidence of other walls here, isn't there?
A lot of the internal walls, of course, would be wood. That's why they've gone. They've perished. All the heavy stones in the outside walls.
You can see the corbels there, can't you? The rotating roof timbers.
Yes, but isn't that fascinating? Because he wants to walk for his soldiers round the wall, and he doesn't want a thick wall, so he corbels it. Look at the people. They don't know they're standing in the air, because on top of those corbels is cantilevered, the stone. And they don't know that there's nothing below them. And about 1,000 people a day, Fred, walk on there, and they don't know there's nothing underneath.
And you can see where they've had the putlogs in, can't you, when they've built the walls, you know.
Can I explain this to you? Because really, these putlog holes are fascinating. You know what they would do? Watch me, Fred. They'd build a wall up to this height. And when it was here, put a log on it. Not in it, on it. That stuck out here to a vertical, and then they had scaffolding. Now, not only would they carry their stones up the scaffolding, they would pull them with ropes.
Yeah.
Those stones would be piled there.
Yeah.
The mason gets on the wall and using those stones raises it. And then you extend the scaffolding and again and again, and see it's gone right to the top.
Yeah.
Right up there, and all that is your line.
Yeah, they're
Now,
everywhere, aren't they? Inside and out. All
and
over.
you know, visitors to the castle always ask the same question. Why on earth did they leave the holes open? And you know they didn't. When the log that's in the wall, they build the wall on top of it, so the log's in. Now, when the whole thing is finished, they demolish, saw off the scaffolding. The put log stays in. They plaster over the end. They don't mind that in a couple of hundred years it will have rotted, and then the holes have re-emerged. And that's how the whole castle was built. But the marvellous thing is, there's a tower at the top of the town wall, and you can't have a long line like that. So there's put log holes go round,
all the way around,
and they ascend to the top. And it's called a helicoidal pattern. I'm sure you're familiar. You've probably gone to a builder's yard and said, I'm building some work at home and I want some scaffolding. And they say to you, do you want it freestanding or do you want it put log? And the name put log has survived from...
Yeah, it just leans, goes up with the building. There's only one outside vertical.
That's right. And that's what's happened in all the years here. People say, how on earth did they transport it? And they didn't. All the mountains of Wales must have been thrown up about 2 million years ago. It was called the Silurian period, and the stone is officially Silurian grit, but we call it granite. Now, this granite is heavy, and it's so heavy, it's still here. And because it's here, they have to put sandstone round all the openings, because the point being that it was difficult to carve granite with the poor equipment they had then, so they've got sandstone. And that sandstone is everywhere, every arrow slit,
every window, every piercing, cornerstones and all that.
It is sandstone. Before we leave this, something else becomes obvious here. The whole castle was white. Every bit of this castle was plastered with limestone. The granite is the stone of the castle. Round the windows is the sandstone, but a limestone plaster was rendered over the whole castle. And when I say the whole castle, outside as well as inside, and believe it or not, the walls of the town. The whole castle was white. It was a gleaming white monument. You might say political outside, because it showed the Welsh on the hills, the sun gleaming on this place, just what was happening. Inside, it helped with the light. Dark corners, dark rooms, white walls, such a tremendous advantage. Now, having said all that, I think we should go and look at the banqueting hall, which is along here. All the social life of the castle is in here. This is in here for a dining room for the servants and soldiers, a banquet hall for the king and his guests, and also a chapel for the soldiers.
See the
tracery there.
Beautiful tracery in the windows.
And that's in 1282. The stained glass there, and again here. The whole lot is incredible. Of course, the sandstone is gone. You can see where it was. And wherever you had a door, you had a beam to bolt it. So this is a bolt coming across here, and all this is shutting off the castle. And look at this hall. It's obviously far too big for one place. It's three. I would like to show you, if you'll come on here, that there was a wooden wall across the other side of that fireplace. That gave you an end room. A room where the soldiers ate. A room with a big fire where they drank. A nice warm, cold night, a warm fire, and a snug. There was also a further wall across this side, and this was a chapel for the soldiers, and there was a stained glass window there, and the king has a chapel at the other end. But really, we're talking about this middle part. Look at these fireplaces. A terrific one there.
Been quite a splendid effort,
there.
hasn't it?
And then, of course, you can imagine there's been a floor across here. This was just a cellar. And therefore, the floor, an oak floor, is the full length of all here. And so the king and queen would have a high table across there. Here would be long tables for the soldiers. Your servants are rushing in from the kitchens. Meat, chicken, gravy. When they eat the chicken, they didn't put the bones on the plate, they flung them in the air, and there'd be massive dogs bouncing around in here. And when you add to that some minstrels making music, and there would be the king and queen chatting up there, the soldiers here, the red wine flowing. This was the life of the castle in here. Unfortunately for Fred, it all went wrong. It went wrong because when they first built the castle, they built a wooden roof with only shingles. Now, only 60 years later, 1346, Edward's died, Edward II's gone, with Edward III. He brings his son, the Prince of Wales, Black Prince, later, and he strips the roof off and rebuilds with corbels. If you look here, this is a corbel, and above it a springer. And from those springers came these arches. 14 of them, 8 in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 6 next door, 14 great stone arches, a brand new oak roof, and now heavy sheets of lead. And what was wrong in the first instance, they hadn't put lead, and I don't think they'd bargained on the Welsh rain, because the shingles rotted, and now we've got the roof perfect. And it was perfect for 300 years. 1346 to 1646, and that brings us to the Civil War. And of course we have Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell, Charles I. I mustn't let you think Oliver ruined this roof. No. He did capture the castle. He showed the king that the new-found cannon and cannonballs rendered these castles out of date, which made Charles II sell them. And it's Lord Conwy who bought this castle, and by then some of the wood was in a poor state.
Nobody cared much,
So he sold the roof. Can you believe that the man who owned the castle took the lead off and sold it? Took the wood off and sold it. He took some of it to Ireland to build a castle in Ireland, and the boat sank, and it's at the bottom of the Irish Sea.
And that'd be an interesting find, that, wouldn't it?
Well, with 2 of these left, this is a lovely example here, and there's another one in the next part of the castle. So out of the 14 arches, we do have 2 left. When you think of the magnificence here, with all that stained glass in that chapel window, stained glass in these windows, the white walls, I've told you, the decoration, the splendour, the feasting, you really are in a medieval hall here, which was the lifeblood of the district in a sense. It really was tremendous.
That fireplace has been a beautiful thing once, hasn't it? The great centrepiece has collapsed.
And although those are weeds today, you can see there have been decorations on these part here.
And these lovely window seats, every window's got
every window throughout the whole castle. A school child about 3 years ago said, "Was that a wooden floor, sir?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't the fire burn a hole in the floor?" Which wasn't bad for a young child. Obviously, there was a stone hearth reaching out, and of course that's gone. But the little child wouldn't know that. But it was quite observant of him to say, "Why didn't it?"
And no doubt the chimney goes all the way up to the top.
And of course it would come out at the top of this tower, and every tower has 2 fireplaces of its own, so there are 3 exits for smoke at the top. There would once upon a time have been a higher chimney inside that tower, which isn't there now, but the hole's there where it was. So we're able to piece all that. When I talked outside about the corbels, you see there this wall again is cantilevered out, which would then support that great oak hearth for the fire, so there'd be no danger of this wooden floor catching any heat at all from there. And all this was just a storage cellar. But even there you see the rendering. The rendering is still there. The whole of the castle was rendered. It does really make it fascinating.
Parts of the original rock.
And so that brings us to something else of importance. If you're building a castle and you're going to live in it, you might be surrounded, you might be besieged.
The well.
That's it, Fred, you're ahead of me. You'd need a well. And that's where we're going now, to look at the well, around this corner.
It's never run dry, has it? It's always been.
Still a spring.
Yeah.
And it's still here. when we come out of this hall, before we get to the well, Fred, I want to show you that the toilets, there are 2 in every tower, and they have to make the wall wider. See how it's built forward? And the little hole is the window. And there's one of those on either side of every tower. But this is the exciting thing, is the well.
Toilets.
Ensuite toilets, you're right, Fred. Then in 1282, ensuite. It took us to get them in our hotels about 10 years ago. Now, if you look down here, this water is black looking, but it isn't, it's clear. It's a spring. There's no light down there. When they made some plaster cat a couple of years ago for the Conwy festival, they brought water up there in buckets and it was clear and they drank it. It was fresh. But there's a thrilling thing here, Fred, because this hole went all the way to the wall. It protected the king in there. So this was a tower with a drawbridge that rotated there and gave the protection to the king in his part of the castle. So, Fred, we've come to the end of the soldiers' castle and we've come into the king's part. The soldiers not allowed in here. This is the residence of the king. And this, of course, is all open. There's never been a roof over the top. So the buildings didn't go across. They went round. So let's, down here,
like a
Fred.
courtyard.
It is a courtyard or a garden, perhaps. So here were rooms for the workers or the officials of the castle, and the king's quarters are higher up. Now, Fred, if you look at the stone, you see it's carved. It tells you it's rich. Look at the big pieces of stone, the tracer that held stained glass. 1, 2, 3 and 4. And if you look through here, here's another great stone arch, like the one you saw in the banquet hall over there. There's quite a funny story here, Fred, because this was called the King's Reception Hall, Privy Chamber. If he's here for a few weeks and people want to see him, they're brought into the castle. Now, you must remember this is a stone castle. Everywhere you look is stone, but not here. It's wood. To get to the king in there, you went up a wooden stairway here to get into the room there, an anteroom where you waited to see the king in there. There was another wooden stair as well, and that was to this door here to get into there. And in this entire castle, there's only 2 wooden stairs. Because should the enemy get in there, and the king hears Welsh fighting in there, he's lost. He's finished. So he flees. He's down steps into the river, and they burn these down to give him time. They lift the drawbridge, and they burn the steps, and that gives the king time to get away. And that's why they're the only wooden steps in the entire castle. And now we're going to go shortly into this tower, but I want to show you a bakery first along in here. First of all, can I show you again how the castle is white? Everywhere you look, you've got the plaster all over. And again, you've got the way they have got this. They've cobbled it out, and it's wonderful the way they did all that. Now into here, Fred. We're going in now, and we're going to see in this tower a bakery, because this was an oven. They bake bread, not pizzas, they bake bread in here. So there's a big fire, and the fire is absolutely heating all these stones. No exit for the smoke. It's had to come forward to go up the chimney here. So once these stones have got very hot, the servant rakes the ashes just onto this floor. The baker puts in trays of dough. There's a metal door goes in place here, and it is that heat that bakes all the bread.
Relied on radiation.
And of course, this is a small overflow oven, because the bigger one is in the other part of the castle where the bank kitchens are. But really, I've not told you about a tower yet, and every tower has got 2 lovely sitting rooms in. This would have been a cellar down below. Now, will you look here at the fireplace up there? And then there's a lovely bay window, and the wall is 12 feet thick.
The seats again.
Going all the way through, and remember, glass at the other end, and of course a door to get in. Now, this, if you like, is called a bed-sit room without food, because all the feeding is in the banquet hall. And again, there's another floor higher up. That again is a fireplace up there. There's another window and the door. Now, we are going to go through that door. We're going up 39 steps onto the top of the castle, when we'll see some of these lovely rooms from up above. So shall we go up here now, Fred? So this is where they came up the steps and they'd wait in here. But what I really want to describe to you is this lovely hall. So if we'll come along here, and I'd like you, Fred, to come a little further and look in here. So if you'll come to here, Fred, and I will show you that there was people working down below. Well, they needed heat in the winter, so they've got a big fire in there, and the chimney comes up there. There's a floor above their heads.
That's the royal fireplace, that one.
And then you've got this royal fireplace. Again, stained glass windows, the white walls. There's an oak floor, but there's an oak roof over here, and therefore the wood hugged the arch. And then there was lead that reached over to here.
On top of
but
the
it
timber.
reached onto here, so water ran away, and you've got drainage holes. And all this lovely hole for the king to receive guests. And this really was a wonderful place because, again, I remind you, there's no roof over there. That was the open courtyard. But here's the King's Hall, the Privy Chamber, and the next one is the Presence Chamber, King's part of the castle. And again, I want to remind you, there were no soldiers in here. That's the soldiers' base. All this is the royal part, a real royal part of the castle. And we're going to move further now to look at, certainly, the King's exit from the castle over by the bridges. If we can come along here now. So as we come past this room where the king did his work, we can see another big fireplace down there, and there's a lower part as well. They had a fire that's in there, but really I'm wanting to show you where the king came to the castle and left from the castle.
On his boat?
Yes. The king's exit and entrance to the castle is these steps. He'd come down up from the water there, he'd climb up these steps, and he'd then come into this part of the castle. If the castle's under attack and he has to flee, then he's down those steps and he's away. But while you're here, another barbican, another floor here. Holes again for the spears and the stones and the tar, with a wall again protecting it. And all this is this protective area for the king. But this is rather a convenient place to point out something else to you. Would you look at the square holes below the arrow slit? Now, can you imagine that if the enemies got near, there's no way you could use the arrow slit downwards. So they pushed logs out through those holes,
and planks across.
and planks on. They'd step out onto the plank and they could shoot directly down. They called hoard holes, H-O-A-R-D-S. And all these around every tower. We see them there, we see them there. They also above us here. So every tower's got hoard holes. So again, you've got a full defence here as well as at the other end.
Both ends.
Which is why I can say again, the castle was never taken. Attacked? Yes. Besieged? Yes. Taken? No. Never taken. And now we're going to go into this tower, we're going to look at something else over here.
This is a wonderful place to get a good panoramic view of the castle. You know, we're here on the King's End, as you might say, on his extra turreted towers and all, and of course you can see where all the buildings have been and the courtyards. You can even see where Oliver Cromwell bashed an hole in it that then the railway men bricked it up, I believe, isn't that right?
Yes, about 1660 Cromwell, but it wasn't bricked up till about 1850. 200 years it was open. You've got 4 of these turrets, you see. This is the king's part of the castle, and on each of these towers is the turret, which was a lookout place. You've only to glance over the hills to see what a wonderful view they had, and also they would have flagpoles on here, advertising to the Welsh in the hills, the king's here, he's in residence. If he wasn't here, there wouldn't be the flags. But you see, we've got all this down here again. The king's part of the castle, his lovely rooms, that quadrangle, such a vista here. And then the soldiers way over there again. The people are entering the castle through there, and the soldiers have got their living quarters. There's their banquet chamber, the feeding room, and of course the entry into the king's party. So clearly demarking there that there's a soldier's castle, there's a king's castle. The turrets are in the king's castle, not the soldier's castle.
There's only 2 ways in. That end where they had to come through the wall of the soldiers' quarters, and the
on the
way
exit,
into the river.
and look down there, how easy it is to defend that rather narrow opening. They had no, there was a barbican down there as well, but the king would come, of course, by water. No bridges in evidence. They would come up out of bridge and into the castle up those steps. This was his entry and exit. And of course, he came every year for a few weeks. Starting in 1282, he'd come for 3 or 4 weeks every year, right the way through till 1294. He was then besieged here when a Maddox Llewellyn besieged the castle, and when he got out, that's when he decided to build Beaumaris Castle. That came 10 years after these three. We really talk about Conwy, Caernarfon, Harlech and Beaumaris, but there was a 10-year gap before they built Beaumaris. And when you're up here, a very pleasant area. On a nice day like this, it's so pleasant to be up here because your vista gives you the coastline, the sea. There's Anglesey over there. The River Conwy is coming down from here, and then you've got Denbighshire over there, and wherever you look, there's beauty. This is what makes this such a wonderful position. It really does.
Which way would the enemy come if they did come? Down this valley?
Down this valley and over from the hills, not this way.
No.
There's been an earlier battle in 1277. The Welsh have given in and the king's taken command of what is now Denbighshire and Flintshire. No enemy that way at all. So the Welsh would come down this valley of the Conwy or down from the hills, which is why the main defence is that way. Strangely enough, all the glass windows in this castle face England, you see. So any arrows coming from Wales comes that way, and they don't get broken. That's just a point that's relevant. Every window faces England.
You can imagine it all painted white or cement rendered. What a formidable thing it must have looked from up there, you know.
Wonderful. And a high flag here, and they say, oh gosh, the king's there now, and they realise what's happened to them. It really was a fantastic situation here. And the soldiers are permanently there. Sometimes this is completely empty. If the king's not here, this wouldn't be used at all. The soldiers wouldn't come here either, other than an odd guard on the top of one of these lookouts. Otherwise, they're all in there.
Somebody doing the dusting, maybe.
Well, yes.
These are the best preserved town walls in Britain. They would have been the most complete, but for a bit of Victorian vandalism by Mr. Telford and Mr. Stevenson. But even having said that, the great thickness of them and the way that they're built, they're perfectly plumb, and they're actually built on the contour of the rock as it comes up the hillside. This large crack here is the result of a bit of legalised vandalism. When Robert Stevenson drove his railway from Chester to Holyhead, he decided to dig a tunnel right underneath the town walls, and this is the end product.